the boldest conceptions of intuition. We aim higher and further. Today, the human mind is clearly enough freed from all prejudices not to recoil before any hypothesis. Not letting itself be stopped by any superstition or any fear, he goes to the extreme limits of logic, believing that to any observation acquired, a new study can add a beyond. He emerged above all from the fear of words and does not condemn any manifestation of cerebral effort under whatever label it comes. Alchemy, Hermeticism, occultism are for him only headings whose mysterious appearances do not frighten him. Isis under her veil can appear as a fantastic being, as a disturbing specter. The scholar goes straight to her and pretends to see her face. Formerly, at this dish of alchemy, we shivered or we was smiling. Superstition or skepticism, which are only one and the same form of ignorance and laziness. We now understand that man does not have the right to deny or to affirm a priori. To say that alchemy is just a fabric of grotesque errors is as absurd as belief by a surge of faith in undemonstrated miracles. Besides, what is a Hermetic philosopher? Wand hit on a stretched sheet. The smoke rings ammonia hydrochloride when Helmholtz. Analysis of the swirling movements in a perfect liquid, that is to say, existing only in the state of mathematical hypothesis, like the point in geometry when M. Dupar count. In a cube of water having a side 1,000th of thousandth, invisible under the microscope, an enormous number of 22 million molecules, these scholars perform the work of alchemists. And the ignorant who would see them act without understanding the scope of their work, apparently insignificant, would tax them with madness. Fools! The word is very vilely pronounced. Crazy Democrat, the great laugher who dared to say that. The varieties of all things depend on the varieties of their atoms in number, dimension, and aggregation. Fool, Empedocles, who asserted adaptation. Crazy, Epicurus, who denied death. Crazy, Lucretius, who professed the indestructibility of atoms. Imperishable materials of the universe. Wasn't M. Framai doing the work of an alchemist when, by causing calcium fluoride to react with red on alumina containing traces of dichromate of potash, it produced polyhedral crystals of ruby? Only the working conditions have changed. The prompters of the Middle Ages, always in fear of persecution, pale with fear of the stake, hid like malefactors, dreaming of the enormous and rapidly acquired power who would triumph over their executioners. On the world, the Catholicity weighed, with its sinister denial of science, with its contempt for bodily well-being, with its heavy theory of sacrifice, with its atrocious ignorance of human needs and rights. The scientist was hiding in his science, and if, obeying this innate passion in the heart of man which pushes him to share his joys as a finder with his fellows, he decided to pedir lur. Still an ultimate vestige of prudence him, advised to use a mysterious, arcane language, and yet, most often, for those who know how to decipher it. Simple in its essence, like all that is logical and true. Today, as Tyndall said, science has no longer the right to isolate herself, but she freely combines all efforts aimed at improving the lot of the man. The great fault of the Hermetists, a fault which cannot be imputed to crime, because they were crushed under the yoke of iron of ignorance and intransigent tyranny, is to have recoiled before the generalization of principles. They stopped, worried, at the threshold of the truth, without daring to cross it, dwelling on searches that were sometimes childish like games. It is also because the Bible encircled them, the fathers of the church suffocated them, and many respectable victims died from not being able to work freely. What must be considered in these philosophers is less the applications they make of their theories than the first idea which dictated them to them. In the writings of each of them, there is, under the form, the bottom, the base, the substratum. When Bacon called sound a spiritual movement, perhaps he was proclaiming some axioms of the future. Do we not find all the elements of alchemical science in the experiments of Norman Lockyer, proving by his spectroscopic studies that in less hottest stars, only hydrogen is found pure, while in those less hot, the metals. Then the metalloids appear, and that on the Earth, finally, hydrogen, metals, and metalloids are never found in a perfectly pure state, but in more or less complex combinations. What is this hydrogen, if not the absolute of the alchemists, and what proof almost conclusive of the possible reduction of matter into its one and primordial principle? Today we can profess highly the dogma of the unity of matter. By experimenting with alcohol or oil, we acquired the irrefutable demonstration of the creation of the solar system by fragmentation of a single mass. But is hydrogen the extreme starting point of what we improperly call simple bodies? The phosphorescent spectra have shown in the atom a complex chemical system whose constituent elements can be dissociated. Huggins, Lecoq du Bois-Baudran popularized this truth that today only bad faith could revoke in doubt. But the atom being a compound body, what is there beyond? What would its constituent elements be? Would they be multiple, or would they refer to a single element? To this question, William Crookes replies boldly, I venture to conclude that the elements of the so-called simple bodies known to us are in reality compound molecules. I ask you so that you i.e. a conception of their genesis, to re-speak our minds through the ages, towards the time when the universe was empty and without form, and to follow the development of matter in the states known to us from something antecedent. I propose to call proto what existed before our elements, before matter as we now know it. This idea of raw material, of prototype, pre-exists in all reasoning minds. This is how Descartes speaks of a universal fluid similar to the most subtle and most penetrating in the world. 15 years ago, M. Berthelot was not backing down before the hypothesis of the decomposition of simple bodies. If the means at our disposal today, he said, still remain impotent, nothing prevents us from supposing that a new discovery, similar to that of the current voltaic, allows the chemists of the future to cross the limits imposed on us, while refusing to admit the logical necessity of the unity of matter. The eminent chemists recognized the likelihood of the transmutation of actual elements into each other. Research on thermochemistry, by introducing into science the idea of dissociation, have dealt a decisive blow to outdated prejudices, in particular to the hypothesis of affinity. From dissociation to synthesis, the process is logical, and the idea of the transformation of metals, or rather of their constitution by the improvement of the pertalic element, imposes itself. Emmy Varenne said 3 years ago, compress hydrogen to 200,000 atmospheres and you will have an ingot of pure gold. From this analysis of matter to the analysis of life, the step will soon be taken. How high does modern science rise when looking face to face at the great organic problems? She says with Claude Bernard, phenomena in inert bodies and in bodies living conditions have the same elements and the same elementary properties. It is the complexity of the arrangement that makes the difference. Descartes had already affirmed with audacity great that life is just a more complicated result of laws of physics and mechanics. Perhaps, and this is where Hermeticism and occultism come in, there are Pertelian substances, somehow so diluted that from material they pass to another state which, without exact notion, we would henceforth call spiritual, a transformation whose formation gave us the birth of electricity, providing us with probable similarities. Isn't the mind an essential state, special of matter, a hyperprial endowed with faculties which we feel the effects, without it being possible for us yet to determine their nature? These problems have always preoccupied men elite, and it would be unfair to deny that little by little their research and their discoveries have changed. The axis of science. Would anyone today dare to tax Crookes or Gibier with madness, charlatanism, or lies? Who would dare to affirm that Katie King did not appear? It seems more than interesting to us. It seems useful to us to place again under the eyes of men of good faith these works, almost all untraceable, which constitute the documents of the large hermetic file of this trial, judged by ignorance, but still subject to review. We have the conviction that in poorly known and poorly studied, such as Roger Bacon's alchemy mirror, or the elixir of the philosophers attributed to Pope John Excieth, the true researcher will be able to free the diamond from its gang. And how many other despised works? In truth, when we understand the works of Swedenborg, of H. N. Wronski, of Louis Lucas, of Faber Dolivet, new immense horizons will open up before us. The spirits. And let us not forget that our scholars, were they from the Institute, are the sons, too often ungrateful, of the Hermetices. Perhaps, as the sages of Thibault want, they are the unconscious pupils of the scholars of some lost ancient AI, the earphones still half-deaf with echoes, spreading from the ancient disasters of the machine cosmic. The collection of writings relating to the Hermetic sciences will, in a short time, be the vade-mecum of those who, without prejudice, admit the possible even before the probable. Jules Lermina, May 1889.
Introduction.
It does not belong to a simple worker of science such as me to pretend to do in this introduction of pure science, expose some new facts, bring them closer to other previously known facts, highlight the connection which unites them to constitute the entirely new branch of science which will rank now as metal transmutation. That is what I must limit myself to. The facts, at least the satisfactory facts, and in a sufficiently respectable number, are missing and probably will be missing for a long time to come. Facts naturally come to us much less quickly than new ideas, as the hypotheses more or less plausible on the metamorphoses of metallic bodies into each other. It is that the facts can be conquered only by very long, very painful, very expensive labor. Time is always running out, and time is existence, it's life, that's all. For me, if I hope to succeed quickly in making the world accept my discovery, which must be after everything, one of the glories of our century to which it will give the means to compose and decompose the bodies to will, it is through perseverance, it is through competition and the support of enlightened men of the future. Let us first notice how much, by this discovery, the three kingdoms, which should in reality be one, are brought together and attached to each other. Their denomination of inorganic beings seems to me eminently improper. These beings also have their organs. They aspire only to perfect themselves, to live in their own way, passing from age to age through various more or less prolonged stations. The duration of these stations depends on circumstances more or less favorable to the development of what I will call mind individualities, streaks, until these reach their last grace of perfection, to be reborn in another form after exceeding this limit, and then come to the aid. They too, to the perfectibility of these first individualities. Nitrogen, this essential body for the growth of beings of both animal and vegetable kingdoms, must also play an important role in that of beings of the mineral kingdom. And who tells us that nitrogen is not equally indispensable to the perfectibility of this whole order of beings? Born, can he not act on them by his mere presence? These points will no doubt be clarified later by experience. This whole set indicates the intimate relations between all the different bodies. It renders perceptible the unknown force which governs all beings. It leads invincibly to which will be the uncontested dogma of science in the future, the unity of matter. This dogma, now admitted tacitly by scholars of good faith, is indeed the only one conforming to the unity of God. Each new step before science reveals to us new aspects of the omnipotence by which everything subsists in the universe. I do not think it is possible anytime soon to demonstrate on the spot that metals are compound bodies, and to immediately demonstrate this by analysis and synthesis. It will take a long time. Stick to long-term experiments carried out in presence of underdeveloped forces, but of long-lasting action. It will even be necessary to intervene the masses to arrive at the factual proof of the composition of metals. But once we hold the key to the system of combination of forces, the duration of the experiments could be singularly shortened, because nothing will prevent us from modifying their forms ad infinitum. Until then, let's go slowly. Let's not ask too much of our experiences at the same time. It's the only way to approach the goal and to reach it without ruinous expense. On the contrary, we risk losing all the fruit of it by wanting to go too fast. I can speak with knowledge of the facts, because that is what I'm happened to myself. My intention is to devote a few public sessions to the presentation of my work on transmutation metals. I will submit sole listeners the artificial gold that I have obtained. I will develop the facts relating to my discovery with all the details, likely to cast light on the phenomenon of the transmutation of alloyed silver into pure gold. I would have used this means of publicity and propagation a long time ago, if I had only obeyed my strong desire to increase the number of men imbued like me with the truths of the transmutation of metals. As I realize them will be successively communicated to the Academy, they will form a second series of memoirs or memories, if you will. I have reason to maintain the well-founded hope that the commission composed of eminent Thénard, Dumas, and Chevreul, responsible for reviewing my transactions, will not be long in report, and that it will come to me mightily each help for the continuation of my experiments. I am told, if this discovery of transmutation metals could be true, it would be a great public misfortune. I cannot allow this objection to pass. I must answer them in the very interest of my discovery. First of all, I hardly understand how reasoning of this nature dares to occur in the middle of the 19th century. If the artificial production of precious metals can cause some disturbances in transactions, this disadvantage will be compensated by incalculable advantages. The changes that may result from this will be gradual, as are before our eyes those resulting from the billions already poured into circulation by the California and Australian placers. Gold production in the latter country is officially estimated for 1,854 at 8 million per week, or 416 million a year. What troubles, what public disasters can be pointed out as produced by this superabundance of one of the representative signs of wealth? It will be the same for the consequences of the transmutation, the day inevitable, soon perhaps, where it can be carried out by economical processes and return to the ordinary conditions of industrial chemistry. We can, at surplus, rely with complete security on the measures to be taken, if necessary, by an enlightened government to safeguard all interests. What was not originally objected to the applications of steam, yet we see it day by day grow the immense benefits. We see it vivifying more and more all branches of industry and trade to cover all points of the globe activity, well-being, life, and steam has not said its last word. And from 1 hour to the next, it can be passed, overwhelmed, replaced. I say the same of electricity. Why are those who dread the artificial production of metals not terrified of electricity? Of that magical force which transmits the exchange of thought with a speed 100 times greater than that of winds? And the applications of electricity are only at their beginning. They must give birth to many other prodigies. The transmutation of metals will therefore have its turn, without more difficulties, without more really dangerous results. One can challenge the deepest mind, the keenest and most penetrating intelligence, to foresee all that this discovery may produce. In industry, it will bring important improvements. The metals easily oxidize, which can be replaced by those which are difficult to oxidize. We understand what our household utensils would gain from it in terms of health and cleanliness. The sciences, medicine, physics, chemistry are all equally called upon, each in its attributions, to be bestowed upon humanity as the consequences of the transmutation of metals, of countless benefits won by the single effort of the human spirit struggling victoriously against the brute forces of nature. Let us carefully note one momentous fact which must occur before all this future can be realized. Land ownership will take on a real value, more solid and more stable than before. When the precious metals are demonetized, this increase in land property value will occur by itself. Why governments, once the unlimited production of gold and silver shall have begun to enter the realm of accomplished expense, would they not grant a premium to landed property, as they give one to precious metals? It would be much more justly, for landed property, the fundamental basis of commerce and industry, of tranquility, general well-being, and public prosperity, has more right than the gold and silver of which it should hold a place, to represent by itself all the values. What is, after all, for the starving man, for example, an ingot of gold and silver if he cannot exchange it against what is eaten? In time of famine, the possessor of wheat is certainly richer than the possessor. Gold, the first does without the second, which cannot do without the first. The value of precious metals is only of the second order. It is, in certain respects, purely factitious and imaginary, from the day when they will cease to be recognized as having a constant value and legal. This value will vanish. Gold and silver will only have a value subject to rise and fall according to the same circumstances which affect all industrial values. Landed property, the least subject of all to these variations, is for that very reason the better able to represent all values. Agriculture will benefit greatly from transmutation metals. She will occupy the arms made available by reducing the number of those employed in the mines. It will attract to itself by the lure of higher wages, that it will be able to pay because of the greater stability of landed property. The intelligent arms which today desert the countryside to come to the towns and cumber the avenues of all industrial quarries. I do not have space to complete this overview of the social good arising from the applications of the transmutation of metals. I now have a few words to say to the young people who would like to experiment in this way. The problem, let them know, is most arduous. The solution can be slow and laborious. Although several times I have succeeded in solving part of the problem by transmuting alloyed silver into pure gold, I still experience serious difficulties in repeating this experience. I therefore cannot too strongly urge those who set themselves to work to proceed with prudence, not to risk all their means of action at the same time, if they do not want to expose themselves to countless torments, to the most disappointing, more bitter, at the loss of their freedom, of their rest. It is not, you will say, the way to go quickly. Nothing is truer. But also, the way that I indicate is the least scabrous, the least perilous of all. It's here the only thing to be followed by man guided by wise foresight. Therefore, devote to your experiments only what your means allow you to risk. You will thus be able to continue them longer and give yourself, for that alone, more chances to reach the goal, without excess expenses. If you sacrifice, on the contrary, all your be too impatient, if in your haste you inconsiderately multiply experiences one after the other, what will happen? You will have risked losing everything without achieving anything. Despair will take you, and who knows where it may lead you. So keep safe all your courage, and take care not to allow yourself to be carried away by any partial success. How many struggles did I myself have to sustain against the enthusiasm born of my first results? I would have been capable, if I had not succeeded in controlling myself, of sacrificing everything to my discovery. But I had in mind the examples that so many inventors have left. Their sad story served as brake my ardor. That's how I was able to persevere in my work and pursue the consequences of my discovery. The moments that I dedicate to it are, I must to affirm it, the sweetest of my existence, and my only regret is not being able to give a stronger part of my time to these dear studies. The complete solution of the problem is a noble and great work. It promises everything to those who will accomplish it. Honor, glory, fortune, the realization of hopes the most unlimited, the most immense desires. But between you and this result, expect to encounter no less great difficulties. Proportionate to the greatness of the result itself, solution for which the word sublime does not seem exaggerated to me when one considers immeasurable consequences. That this solution is possible, do not doubt it. The facts acquired by my research are irrefutable proof of this. I, if my own testimony does not seem sufficiently exempt from prejudices, allow me to allege others whose weight in such a matter cannot be disputed. Here are the terms in which Mr. Victor Munier, the eminent publicist, reports on my work in the press of June 24, 1854. The immediate predecessor of Mr. Tiffereau in the pursuit of the great work is, except error or omission, the author of a brochure which appeared in 1832 under the title, The Hermes Unveiled. Despite the promises of the title, the author behaves like an ambitious follower deserving praise addressed by Paracelsus to those who, having received communication of the great secrets of God, Magnalia Del, have the prudence of keeping them hidden until Elijah comes, the artist. Mr. Tiffereau, it must first be done justice, is more elementary than his predecessor. We see immediately that it is not in the works of Hermes, in the Pimandre, in the table of the 7 chapters, in the Emerald Table, that he sought the mysterious key gold. It will not be necessary to do for him what Alendus did for Paracelsus, a dictionary of the terms he used. Former student and chemistry trainer at the professional school of Nantes, if he meets the Hermetic philosophers, it is because after having poured so much contempt on it. Chemistry nowadays tends to connect with alchemy. Here, as in so many other circumstances, it seems indeed that adult science will end up avenging philosophical thought, outrages that a science in its infancy has lavished upon it. Chemistry is no longer, no doubt, as it was from Suidas, the art of composing gold and silver, but she calls itself the science of the transformations of matter. It accepts as a fundamental principle that the properties of bodies are related to their arrangement molecular. She says with Laurent, form, number, and order are more essential than matteron. On the still open tomb of the immortal creator organic composition unit theory, a chemist said, this theory is now penetrating into the chemical sciences and perhaps preparing a revolution in ideas too, and what a numerous series of facts borrowed from mineral chemistry, from organic chemistry, from crystallography we could invoke in support of this thought. From there to the principle even of chemistry, to the principle of the radical homogeneity of metals, or, as we would say today, of their isomeria. The distance still uncrossed does not seem insurmountable. N, in his lessons in chemical philosophy given at the Collège de France, M. Dumas expressed himself thus to apropos of isomerism, a principle whose discovery is due to him. Would it be permitted, he said, to admit bodies' single isomery? This question, you see. 1. Derivative Radical Theory, page 5. Extract from the Revue Scientifique et Industrielle. 2. Words of M. Dumas. 3. Mr. Dumas named CCR as isomers, those which having the same. Touches closely on the transmutation of metals. Solved affirmatively, it gives chances of success to the philosophical stone. It is therefore necessary, said M. Dumas again, to consult experience, and experience must to say, is not in opposition so far with the possibility of the transmutation of simple bodies, at least, of some simple bodies. M. Louis Figuier, in his book on alchemy and the alchemists, without deciding the question of transmutation metals, does not come out against it and clearly allows us to see the possibility of this phenomenon. Here's what that he says on this subject. By a strange reversal, and very likely to inspire us with reserve in the appreciation of the scientific views of the past, the chemistry of our days, after having, for 50 years, considered as unassailable the principle of the simplicity of metals, now inclines to abandon it. The existence in ammoniacal salts of a metal composed of hydrogen and nitrogen, which bears the name of ammonium, is now unanimously accepted. We have since succeeded a few years producing a whole series of compounds containing real metal, and this metal consists of composition, have different chemical properties. This often takes on another meaning. By the meeting of 3 or 4 different bodies, the number of combinations of this kind increases every day and tends more and more to cast doubt on the simplicity of metals. Let us conclude from this examination that the facts borrowed from experience offered sufficient characteristics of probability to deceive the minds of the observers. This then authorizes their belief in the great phenomenon of which they were pursuing the realization. First memory. Presented to the Academy of Sciences in the session of June 27, 1853, metals are compound bodies. To all the wonderful industrial creations that mark the 19th century, to posterity I come, humble and obscure worker, to bring my stone for the common building. Steam, electricity have already changed the face of the world, and who can say where their power will stop? But there are other motives for public wealth, and I come to point out one whose discovery will change well-working conditions and will frighten the most daring spirits with its scope. It takes no less to decide me to confide to the public the discovery that I have made, that the awareness of its importance and the honor that will flow to my country for having been the cradle of such an invention. I discovered the way to make artificial gold. I made it of gold. At this announcement, I can already hear the clamors of the incredulous and the sarcasms of the scholars, but to both I will answer, listen, and see. As a student and assistant in chemistry at the École Professionnelle Supérieure de Nantes in 1840, I devoted myself above all to the study of metals, and, convinced that this part of the chemical sciences offered an immense field to harvest for a man of observation, I resolved to undertake a voyage of exploration in Mexico, that classic land of metals. In December 1842, I left, and hiding my secret works under the shelter of a still new art, the daguerreotype, I was able to browse in all directions these immense countries. These placers, this province of Sonora, these Californias which since have so much fixed the eyes of the world. It is by studying the deposits of metals, their gangs, their various physical states, it is by questioning the miners and comparing their impressions, that I acquired the certainty that metals were subject in their formation to certain laws, certain unknown stages, but the results of which strike the mind of whoever studies them with care. Once placed at this point of view, my researches became more ardent, more fruitful. Little by little the light came, and I understood the order in which I had to begin my works. After 5 years of research and work, and finally succeed in producing a few grams of perfectly pure gold, it is impossible for me to paint the immense joy that I felt by reaching this desired goal. From then on, I had only one fixed thought, to return to France and make my country benefit from my discovery. Leaving Mexico was very difficult then, for the Americans had just taken possession of Veracruz, Mexico, and Tampico, and it took no less than 6 months to come from Guadalajara to Tampico, where I embarked for France in May 1848. Gold that I had artificially obtained, crystallization, appearance, density, perfect malleability, ductility, absolute insolubility in simple acids, solubility in aqua regia and alkaline sulfides. Nothing is missing. The amount I possess today can leave me no doubt on the fact of the discovery and on the little expense by means of which I was able to prepare it. Now, to make disappear the marvelous whose this discovery will not fail to be surrounded in the eyes of many people, I must say what are the views that have guided me in my work, and how my success was the work of logical deductions already acquired by science. Metals are not simple bodies, but many compound bodies. The Hermetic alchemists and philosophers of Middle Ages had no fixed theory in their research on the nature of metals, guided by a mystical thought. And seeing in all the bodies of nature a mixture of matter and divine emanation, they thought to be able to wrest from nature the secret of this mixture and disengaging the raw material from its essence, to reduce it to a single type for metals at least. Hence the idea of what they called the great work, the philosopher's stone, the transmutation of metals. Divided into several sects, the enlightened ones vainly flattered themselves that they had discovered a panacea capable of prolonging men's lives beyond the ordinary term, while others, the most pious, confined themselves to seeking the transformation of base or imperfect metals into metals precious and perfect, that is, in silver. The works of these men have remained fruitless, except the few heroic remedies with which they endow the art of cure, remedies drawn mainly from antimonial and mercury preparations. At the beginning of this century, it was in good taste to lay handsel sarcasm on these madmen of another era. And it is to hardly if today some scholars do justice to the idea, to the mother thought that guided the alchemists. Let us first pose a fruitful principle accepted today by all chemists. The properties of bodies are the result of their molecular constitution. Nature presents us with a large number of bodies polymorphs, which, depending on whether they crystallize in one system or another, acquire very different properties, without their composition being altered or changed in any way. So the carbonate of rhombohedral lime or calcareous spar and prismatic lime carbonate or aragonite have exactly the same composition, and yet have very different properties. Science has succeeded in producing these two salts at will in these two forms. One of them has double refraction, the other does not. One is denser than the other, one finally. Crystallizes at the ordinary temperature, the other only at a temperature of more than 100 degrees. Everyone knows that sulfur is different depending on the temperature to which it was exposed and the crystalline form it was made to take. A host of metallic oxides, such as certain oxides of iron and chromium, substituting for other bases and salts, giving them diverse properties in typical forms. Oxides of zinc, mercury, several combinations of metals change their properties under the influence of a change of molecular constitution produced by heat or electric forces. Spongy platinum, white-hot clay, determined by their simple immersion in a mixture oxygen and hydrogen, the combination of these two gases, the result of which is water. In organic nature, do we not see analogous phenomena occur every day? Is not starch transformed into sugar by its mere contact with sulfuric acid? Without, however. The latter is altered. Is it not the presence of a material nitrogen which is due to the phenomenon of fermentation which causes organic matter to undergo such curious transformations? Finally, cyanogen, this compound radical, is it not the product of the action of an alkaline base on a nitrogenous matter? I could cite 1,000 other facts to the support of the stated principle, if I were not afraid of appearing one to flaunt science. I will therefore simply repeat that there is nothing but very just in this thought that the constitution of a body being changed, this body acquires new properties, while retaining its temporal nature, its composition, if you will. Consequently, it is enough to discover the body which, by its catalytic force, can act on the body which one wants transformer, then to put the latter in certain conditions of contact with it. To operate this transformation, here is the principle which is not denied by any chemist today, the one that I implemented, and to which I owe my success. In an analogous order of ideas, shall I repeat here all that has been said and written by the moderns on the probability of the composition of metals? If we go of Stahl's theory, which considered metals as made up of a radical and a principle called phlogiston, to arrive at Lavoisier, who, by his theory of combustion, has so long misled observers, if finally we consider that all the bodies of nature, plants and animals, in incalculable number, are nevertheless formed of 3 or 4 elements, in spite of their immense diversity, and if we reflect that it is never only with one very few simple substances that nature produces all compounds, is it not natural to think that the 40 and some metals, considered today as simple bodies, are only mixtures, combinations perhaps, of one single radical? With another unknown body, no doubt badly studied, whose action escapes us, but which alone modifies the properties of this radical, and shows us 40 metals where there is only one R, how to admit that nature has created this quantity of different metals to form the inorganic kingdom, when, with 4 elements at the most. She has created such a prodigious quantity of plants and animals, and if a man comes to demonstrate this unknown body which has escaped so much research, and to make it act on a given metal, what is there of surprising that this man changes the nature of this metal by giving it, with a molecular constitution different, the properties of such other metal in which does this constitution naturally exist? Enough on this subject for any man whatever, little versed in the study of the physical sciences, and for the good sense of all. I am now able to clarify the position. I was able to produce gold and achieve transformation full of a given quantity of a metal into pure gold. I've already said that this given quantity was a few grams, and so far I've not yet managed to operate on a large enough mass to be able to say that I have succeeded on a large scale. For achieve, I need other resources. I ask those who want to get in touch with me. I do not want not, unless forced to do so, have the fate of so many despised inventors in their homeland, carry abroad the fruit of my discovery, and make our industry rivals. I appeal to my compatriots, and I look to publicity for the help I need to perfect my work. In closing, I believe unnecessary and imprudent, perhaps to reflect on the immense scope of artificial gold production. France has the most strong numeraire of Europe. Approximately 3 billion francs, the coming depreciation of gold, by the abundance of this metal coming from California and Australia, are 2 facts quite easy to reconcile so that the consequences follow on their own. So I am silent and wait. Second memory. Read at the Academy of Sciences in the session of October 17, 1855. By Tiffereau. Metals are compound bodies. In order to dispel the doubts which may remain in people's minds concerning the discovery which I have made of artificial gold, I will enter into some details of my experiments and prove that, under the circumstances in which I have operated, I could not take illusions for realities. Gentlemen, the metal I have chosen as the basis of my experiments is silver, a metal perfectly distinct from others by its chemical properties, which are completely characteristics, as we know, and which, therefore, do not allow it to be confused with any other. By this very reason, it is easy to get it chemically pure, so that acting on this metal, I could fully account for partial changes or whole that could operate the chemical agents that I employed. In my first attempts, I was able to convince myself that a very small amount of silver passed to the state of gold, but in such small quantities that at first I doubted the success of the fact. Although, however, I was well convinced that the silver which I employed did not contain the least quantity of gold. If I only had this result to show, one could doubt and say that the silver used was not chemically pure. That moreover silver always contains gold, and that there is therefore nothing astonishing that I have found some. I would still admit that silver might contain traces of gold, but what I cannot admit is that can there to have an illusion on my part, when, in several other capital experiments that I have made. I've seen all the silver used change in appearance and properties. The metal which, before the experiment, was entirely soluble in nitric acid, has become completely insoluble in this reagent. On the contrary, it has become completely soluble in aqua regia and the alkaline sulfides. In a word, he has acquired all the chemical and physical properties of gold. All silver has turned into gold. I will add that I have operated on fairly large quantities, as I said in the previous chapter. For that there can be no doubt left to me about the fait accompli. I have carefully followed all the phases of these experiments, which have been very long. And if I cannot always repeat them with the same success, the capital fact of the transformation of silver into gold does not exist less. I have the honor to place under the eyes of the Academy a small part of this first gold such as I obtained it. It is easy to convince oneself that this product has its special cachet that distinguishes it from mine. Gold, that of placer, and that of auriferous sands. When he is melted, it is impossible to distinguish it from natural gold, perfectly identical with it. I have the honor to place before the eyes of the Academy a small ingot of this molten gold. To prepare for any event and ward off any eventuality relating to the discovery I have made, in addition to the sealed packet that I have deposited at the Academy, I've handed over samples of my artificial gold and the detailed description processes that I have used to get it, in the course of the operations of which I have just spoken, and that I have varied in all forms. I have noticed striking analogies in the phenomenon of the transformation of various metals on which I have operated, and without going into unnecessary detail here, I believe I can conclude from my experiences that the transformation of copper into money has been demonstrated to me and will soon be a fact for science than other metals. Iron, for example, can be transformed into copper, silver, gold. Now I must obtain artificial gold on a large scale. It is this process that I seek, for which I lack the means. This admission of impotence will not surprise the Academy. It conforms to all the precedents of the inventors who preceded me. None of them that I know of has perfected his invention with his own means. And too often they have lost the fruit of it, exhausted as they were by the expenses they had incurred, or discouraged by public incredulity and carelessness. As for the consequences of the transformation of silver into gold, the production of artificial gold, I leave it to the wisdom of the Academy to foresee whatever disturbances and advantages they may bring in relations. Trade of the peoples, in our system financial, in the respective values of the products of the soil and industry. By publishing here the fact of my discovery, I have less for the purpose of drawing honor or profit from it, than to enrich science and to make my country benefit from it. Instrument of Providence which guided my attempts, I obey the impulse that pushes me, and come to ask advice and support to the first body in the world. I confine myself here, gentlemen, to these reflections, praying the Academy to honor with its attention the communication that I have just given him, and to grant me the moral encouragement that every inventor needs to perfect his work. I will now respond to some objections of what was said to me about my first memoir. Some say to me, ironically, "Since you have produced gold, lest you produce some first kilograms, then quintals, then finally tons, and you will become the first potentate in the world. You will be able to dethrone the Emperor of Russia. Your discovery is worth more than the sword of the great Frederick." In your place, I shut up. I will answer that with facts known to all. Why did Fulton not immediately arrive to apply advantageously the motive power of steam to navigation? Why was he compelled to ask the competition and the money of the sovereign? S to perfect his work and apply it on a large scale? How many years did he devote to his discovery? Why did he not limit his first efforts to a machine operating on a small scale? Why did the French engineer Le Bon, who discovered gas for lighting, why Leblanc, who discovered artificial soda, not take advantage of their immortal discoveries? Didn't Le Bon die in poverty? And yet today the companies that exploit his discovery make colossal fortunes. Was Leblanc enriched by his work? When Lavoisier discovered oxygen to obtain this gas, in principle, the operation was very long and very expensive. Today is of the simplest operations of chemistry. Instead of one process, we have several that supply this gas to very little expense, witness, among others, that of Mr. Boussignol, which in reality is only a matter of fuel, since the same body can constantly provide oxygen. And who tells us that it will not be so with the transmutation of metals? To finish with this enumeration, which I could prolong, I will quote the beautiful discovery of M&M. Daguerre and Ipse, what time, what expense and care has it not cost them? Why weren't these gentlemen told to continue perfecting their methods? It's not what a few silver plates cost, a few grams of iodine, bromine, and mercury. Don't is there not enough here to make thousands of experiments? Didn't they sell their discovery, imperfect as it was then, to the government? From that moment it served and still serves to enrich those who exploit it by continuing to perfect it. Likewise, I am convinced that the discovery of gold artificial will be a source of immense wealth for those who will be able to exploit it and will render to science, industry, and the arts real services of incalculable significance. Other people have told me, and that's why I talk about it here, your discovery will be like the artificial production of precious stones, which cost more than those found in nature. This objection, gentlemen, is worthless, because without speaking here of the discovery in itself, nor of its consequences, I say that there cannot be possible comparison between these two artificial productions. Since most of the natural gemstones have little value, that, on the contrary, they acquire a lot through art the size, that, more often than not, labor costs more than the price of the raw material. The same is true of artificial stones, and even these stones are used only as objects of luxury. They have very few industrial applications. The artificial production of precious metals, contrary, is such that the value of these does not increase little by work, and they are besides of a daily and considerable employment, like base of any industry by their special properties which return them more and more essential to all human work. And what would civilization be, of which we are so proud? That would be the physical sciences themselves. Without the precious metals, not possible. Comparison between metal production precious and that of semi-precious stones, in terms of both their consequences and their use as civilizing agent. Third memory, presented May 8, 1854. Metals are compound bodies. Troisième mémoire, present le 8 Mai 1854. Les métaux sont discours compas. I had asked for the honor of reading this third memoir to the Academy. For more than 3 months, I had made myself register with the Secretariat for this purpose. Not knowing at all just when I could get my turn at reading, fearing that I might have to wait several more weeks, my health and time not permitting. More than attending the sessions, I take the decision to deliver my work to publicity as I intended to do it. Read at the Academy. I long to have judges and that we know what to expect from my discovery. These considerations make me decline the honor that I had requested to appear before the Academy, an honor which cannot, after all, add no more value to this brief. Introduction. Gentlemen, in my previous communications, I had the honor of announcing to the Academy my discovery of the means to obtain the gold artificially. To operate the transformation gold money, I submitted to the Academy, compared with the gold of the placers and the gold in ingots, the artificial gold which I had obtained. Many scholars still today consider as chimerical the transmutation of metals announced by a crowd of people, some in bad faith, others duped by their own illusions. I had to suffer the common fate, and the announcement of my discovery met with many incredulous. Besides, what weight could be in favor of my affirmations, my name totally unknown in science, when I attested the possibility of operating the transmutation? The coldness with which my efforts were welcomed should not surprise me, far from complaining about the kind of repulsion and commiseration felt by those who had knowledge of my discovery. I think I ought rather to congratulate. The infatuation in his favor could have been fatal to him. For although it's perfectly real, it is based only on operations on a very small scale, having produced only a few grams of gold. They would not have failed to summon me to produce some quintals. If, as I hope, I manage to convince the Academy of the reality of my successes, I will have conquered the double advantage of triumphing over prejudices which, moreover, I perfectly understand, and to prove once more that providence, in its impenetrable views, sometimes deigns to use the humblest to do great things. Until that day, gentlemen, I had thought I could hope that, supported by public opinion, I would find, for to follow up on my work, the assistance of a few enlightened men, jealous of assuring France with me the honor and the advantages of a discovery of this nature. My hopes, I must admit today, were vain and illusory. Without further ado, the moment came to establish my right of priority by delivering to the advertising my processes for the production of artificial gold. Thousands of experiments, repeated and varied ad infinitum, have given rise in me conviction that these processes could only gain from being exposed to the light of day. After all, it is perhaps not for me to keep hidden any longer a secret whose disclosure must call on the production of metals, the investigations of scholars, the work of eminent chemists with whom France is honored. Such are the motives which have earned me the honor of appearing before you, gentlemen, ready to furnish all the proofs of sincerity which the Academy may please to claim from me, ready to operate under its eyes with the raw materials that she herself will have made available to me. Finally, before going into the matter, I must realize to the Academy the reasons of expediency which determine me to make this communication to him at this moment. After 5 whole years of stay and travels in all the parts of Mexico, with no other resource to meet the expense of my experiments than the product of my work in photography, I returned to France with a modest capital, fruit of my savings, to complete my discovery by means of some instruments of precision that I could not obtain in Mexico, and new research fully confirmed the results obtained by me in this land of precious metals. Soon I saw my resources dwindle, without knowing if they would suffice to give me time to attain the goal of my labors. I foresaw the moment when I was going to miss everything at once. I did not hesitate to sacrifice a part of what I had left to create the means existence. I found some in the exploitation of some instruments relating to the physical arts. Unfortunately, these resources are too limited to allow me to lead my discovery to the perfection it must attain. I therefore take the resolution to deliver it as it is for publicity. In the interest of science and for the honor which must reflect on my country, I give formal notice to those who have the means to work on my data and my processes to enrich the arts and commerce. It is not without experiencing a painful feeling that I adopt this resolution. It would have been sweet for me to walk alone to the goal, to reach it, and to pay homage to my century of success, conquered by my only efforts no matter. I will none the less cordially support with all my power any attempt made to go forward in the career that I open today. For the reality of the great fact which I am advancing leaves no doubt in my mind. Only I would have liked to offer my processes to the public only with a degree more precision and security. There all my ambition was limited. But apart from the first resources, I miss everything: stability, absence of personal concerns, the ability to follow without distraction, and with maturity the complex phenomena of the transmutation of metals. Long experiments on the influence of sunlight have compromised my organs of sight. Fatigue has undermined my health. Work of another order imposed on me by the need to support my family forced me to admit my impotence when I have the conviction, the moral certainty of the possibility of success neighbor by operating on a large scale. If it were given to me to overcome the entirely material causes of this impotence. In the presence of these circumstances which I have just exposed to the Academy in all their truth, I carry out my resolution to make public my procedures for obtaining artificial gold. May the Academy forgive me for having dared talk about it. The feeling of love of science that only my approach dictates to me carries with it its excuse. First part. For the enlightened traveler who crosses the province as Mexican women, observing with intelligent attention the mineralogical state of this country, its alluvial soils, its placers and its deposits of precious metals, there emerges from this examination a fact likely to shed great light on the natural production of these metals. This fact is the presence, I could say the extreme abundance of nitrates of potash and soda which sprout from all sides on the surface of the ground, and which accumulate in regular crystals in the bed of the torrents descending from the mountains. Masses of it are even exploited, which are naturally pure enough to enable them to be employed in the manufacture of mine powder. And it also encounters iodides, bromides, and chlorides in significant amounts. Pyrites, other agent no less important, are in perpetual contact with alkaline nitrates. This agent contributes its share of certain influence on the production of metals. These two classes of compound bodies, acting under the double influence of light and heat, give rise to phenomena, electrical from which result the decomposition of the metalliferous grounds, and the new combinations from which come the metals. This view, this theory of fermentation, metals, can be supported or fought. I will only say that it has for me a degree of probability which became the guide and the starting point of my research. The opinion of transmutation, of the perfectibility of metals, is so generally accepted by the miners of the Mexico that we should not be surprised to hear them say, speaking of the pieces of ore that they accept or reject for exploitation, "This is good and ripe. This is bad and has not yet gone gold." From my point of view, the reactions under the influence of which the transformation of metals takes place constitute a complex phenomenon in which the principal role belongs to the oxygenated compounds of nitrogen. The action of heat, light, electricity favors or develops, within certain limits, the combinations of these compounds with the unknown radical which constitutes the metals. Everything leads me to believe that this radical is hydrogen, which we know only in the gaseous state and of which the other physical states escape our research. Nitrogen seems to act in these combinations as a ferment would act in the transformations of materials, organisms under the influence of this same agent. Oxygen fixation, its more or less durable combination with the radical under the action of a nitrogenous compound. Here is for me the key to the transformation of metals. Whether these theoretical ideas are true or false, correct or erroneous, is what I will not undertake to discuss here. I think I should confine myself to saying that, without it being possible for me to acquire the mathematical certainty of their reality. Their influence presided over my experiments. Their probability in my eyes is born of effects noted over several years of observations. Whether I mention it, it is to make the walk I have followed better understood, and perhaps to throw some light on the road where those who will follow after me will walk. The same search order. Be that as it may, I will draw a brief account of the result of my observations. Their filiation will allow me to understand by what sequences of facts and ideas I was led to conceive the theory that I have just summarized. One, a first fact that everyone can reproduce at will, was my starting point. If pure silver is reduced to filings and nitric acid, also pure, is made to act on it. Certain particles of this filing will remain insoluble in the acid. They won't disappear that after the dissolution has been, for several days, left to rest. 2 degree if pure silver filings are projected into glass tubes 4 to 5 millimeters in diameter on 12 to 15 centimeters in height, filled to a third of their capacity with nitric acid at 36 degrees after this acid has been, for a certain time, exposed to the action of solar rays. It will be seen that a certain portion of the silver particles will remain completely insoluble in the acid, despite the temperature rise produced by the reaction. 3, if one operates on an alloy of 9/10 of silver and 1/10 of copper, the reaction will be more lively, and the insolubility of certain parts of the alloy will be the same as in the preceding operation. 4 degree, the phenomenon will happen again if we operate on the same alloy out of contact with the sun's rays. 5 degree in all these experiments, independently of the insolubility of particles of pure silver or alloy, you may notice the presence of a light brown insoluble deposit. 6 degree, by varying these experiments by the use of nitric acid at various degrees of dilution, after having, however, exposed it to the action of the sun's rays for a more or less prolonged time, I was able to collect plots of perfectly insoluble, impure, and boiling nitric acid, soluble, on the contrary, in the solution of chlorine. 7 comparative experiences have allowed me to recognize. 1, that the gold introduced in small quantities into the alloy facilitates the artificial production of this metal. 2, that pure silver is much more difficult to turn into gold than when it is alloyed with other metals. 3, that, as I stated in my first memoir, the catalytic force has something to do with the transmutation of metals. 4 degree, that chlorine, bromine, iodine, and sulfur, in the presence of the oxygenated compounds of nitrogen, favor the production of the precious metals. 5 degree, that the ozonized air seems to activate this production. 6 degree, that the temperature of 25 degrees and above is favorable to the accomplishment of this phenomenon. 7, that the successful results depend largely on the duration of the operations. On these first facts observed, which had not been offered with the same degree of certainty, no more than with perfectly identical characters, I based new research on the influence of the solar light, so intense and so favorable under the beautiful climate of Mexico. My first success was obtained at Guadalajara. Here are the circumstances. After having been exposed for 2 days to the action of rays of pure nitric acid, I projected filings of pure silver alloyed with pure copper in the proportion of the coin alloy. A strong reaction appeared, accompanied by a very abundant release nitrous gas. Then the liquor, left to rest, showed me an abundant deposit of intact filings agglomerated in a mass. The evolution of nitrous gas continuing without interruption, I left the liquid to itself for 12 days. I noticed that the aggregated deposit increased noticeably in volume. I then added a little water to the solution without any precipitate being produced. I still left the liquor to stand for 5 days. During this time, new vapors continued to get away. These 5 days elapsed. I carried the liqueur up to boiling. I kept it there until the evolution of the nitrous vapor ceased, after which I evaporated dryness. The material obtained by the desiccation was dry, dull, blackish green. She offered no semblance of crystallization. No saline part had been deposited. Then treating this matter with pure nitric acid and boiling for 10 hours, I saw matter become of a light green without ceasing to be aggregated in small masses. I added a new quantity of pure and concentrated acid. I boiled again. It was then that I finally saw the disintegrate. Dematerial take on the brilliance of natural gold. I collected this product and I sacrificed a large part of it to submit it to a series of comparative tests with pure natural gold. It was not possible for me to notice the slightest difference between natural gold and the artificial gold I had just obtained. My second experience of the same kind as the previous one took place in Colima. The phenomena occurred as in Guadalajara, under the influence of light solar, which did not cease to act throughout the treatment of the alloy by nitric acid. Only I reduced to 8 days the duration of the first treatment, and the acid that I used was enough water so that the solar action alone could not produce the release of vapors nitrous. Now, as these did not cease to emerge, I attributed this fact to an electric current due to the kind of fermentation of which nitrogen seems to me to be the principle. The nitrous gas continued to evolve constantly as long as the liquor was not brought to a boil. I finished this operation like the previous one. Nevertheless, in this second experiment, I employed, towards the end of the operation, more concentrated acid to bring the disintegration of the matter and to bring it to take the brilliant color of gold. I made a third experiment on my return to Guadalajara. It was completely successful, like the two preceding, without presenting any extraordinary phenomenon worth noting. The amount of alloy I had put into experiment turned entirely into pure gold, as I said in my second memoir. Here, gentlemen, in all its sincerity, the fact obtained, the constant result that I have been able to reproduce several times in Mexico. This fact, I do not succeed in reproducing it in France, and by acting on larger quantities considerable. I do not appreciate, no doubt, the causes that act in the reactions by virtue of which metals, soluble in nitric acid, become insoluble by constituting themselves in a particular molecular state, whence result properties entirely different from those which these same metals possessed before to have experienced these reactions. Should these changes, to which the action of sunlight seems to contribute so powerfully, be attributed to a special electric or magnetic state, or the role of nitrogen under this influence? Finally, is there production of a particular oxide of one silver and copper, such as those presented to us by iron? That's what I haven't been able to verify so far. Second part. Gentlemen, after having, as I have just explained, repeated many times the experiences that precede, always operating under the influence of the solar rays without being able to discover what causes determined or prevented the production of artificial gold. When I varied the processes or made only slight changes, I finally wanted to be sure of the real effect of the light by operating outside of this influence. Here is the summary of my attempts in this direction. Successful attempts. Having mixed 12 parts of concentrated sulfuric acid and 2 parts of nitric acid at 40 degrees, I fill of this mixture, up to a quarter of their capacity, glass tubes into which I projected silver filings and copper, prepared with the pure metals, the copper entering for 1/10 of this alloy. After the first reaction, accompanied by emission more or less abundant nitrous gas, depending on the quantity of nitric acid admitted into the mixture, we see the solution take on a beautiful violet hue. We then bring to the boil, which we maintain for several days, adding from time to time, according to if necessary, pure and concentrated sulfuric acid, so as to drive out all the nitric acid. This prolonged boiling time is necessary because the two acids form a very strong combination steady. As long as this combination remains, the gold does not settle. We can also notice that after several days of boiling, if we add a little water to the solution, there is still a slight released nitrous gas, which would indicate that the sulfuric acid, very concentrated, has more affinity for water than for this nitrogenous compound. To get rid of nitrous vapors, which could stay again, you have to add a little ammonium sulfate and boil again. In these experiments, the gold appears to be dissolved thanks to the nitrous gas, because as the amount of gas becomes weaker, gold precipitates in films excessively thin, which are deposited by cooling on the walls of the tube on the side where it is inclined. We can there distinguish at a glance. When the amount of gold produces is large enough, the metal comes together en masse at the bottom of the tube. Another means with a less slow effect consists in replacing, in the preceding experiment, the nitric acid by nitrate of potash. I have varied, I repeat, these essays ad infinitum, except under the empire of accidental circumstances, I have generally observed the same results. It is up to the Academy to decide on the value of these experiences. I am ready, as I expressed at the beginning of this thesis, to operate under the eyes a commission taken from within the Academy with the reagents that will be provided to me by this commission. I've meditated a lot on a probable theory which can guide chemists in operations aimed at the production of artificial gold. I could expose strong inductions, more or less striking analogies, capable of clarifying doubts about the value of agents to whom I attribute the production of gold. But I understand the need to be sober, in reflection, and not abuse the indulgence of the Academy. Later, if such a work becomes opportune, I could develop the ideas which the curious facts have awakened in me, objects of my observations, for 15 years devoted to experiments on the same subject. Fourth memory, presented to the Academy of Sciences in the session of August 7th, 1854. Metals are compound bodies. My attempts at the transmutation of metals had for starting point for observing the facts. Having dissolved a small quantity of silver free from traces of gold in perfectly pure nitric acid, this silver, precipitated from its slightly acidic solution by pure copper, did not bother me furnished, at the time when it had just been obtained, no parcel of gold. This same precipitate, subjected after several months to the same test method, gave me traces of gold. Other samples of silver precipitated by various pure metals, obtained long ago, tried and labeled, silver free from traces of gold, have also enabled me to observe the same result. I did not know precisely to what to attribute this fact, either to a slow transformation of the silver into gold, or to the prior presence of particles of gold, either in the silver, or in metals used in precipitation. I repeated the same experiments in the following manner. I operated on pure silver, reduced by chalk and charcoal from its chloride, perfectly washed with chlorine water, then with pure water. I dissolved part of this silver in pure nitric acid and another part in pure sulfuric acid. Both solutions were diluted with distilled water and then filtered. The silver of these two solutions has been precipitated partly by pure copper, partly by an alloy of copper and zinc with a little iron, the precipitates washed with distilled water. Then subjected to the test method previously employed, did not furnish the slightest sign of the presence of gold. These various silver precipitates having been exposed for more than 8 months in contact with the air, then tested again, I could see in every one the presence of gold. In small quantities, it is true, but very visible in the single-site sun. The highest proportion of gold was provided by silver precipitate from its nitric solution by means of the alloy metals copper, zinc, and iron. Nitrogen dissolution of silver, precipitated by copper alone, reduced from its chloride by hydrogen, held the second rank as regards the production of gold. The money precipitated from its dissolution in sulfuric acid gave gold in less quantity, always by operating on the same quantity of matter first, and with the same acid employed at the same dose. If we had to judge from the atoms produced in these experiments in a given time, the time required to turn all silver into gold would be several centuries. In these tests, I operated on 50 centigrams of precipitate. I have seen the acceleration of the transformation of silver into gold in the silver precipitate, obtained as I indicated above, through which I pass an electric current. I started down this road new series of experiments. As soon as they are finished, I will let you know the result. I cannot insist too strongly on physicists to awaken their attention to the important role that electricity is called upon to play in the transmutation metals. The experiments cited in my third memoir, especially that in which I projected silver filings into nitric acid heated in the sun, are none of them. Are they not a proof? In this experiment, the filings of silver agglomerated and massed within its own solvent, and the time it took to transform the alloy into gold pure. The material took on the color of natural gold only after when it began to fall apart. The footprint lime, an easy to recognize seal of authenticity for this artificial gold, is still distinguished there today. I defy any human hand to produce an imitation with gold natural. The mysterious forces of nature have passed over the silver filings alloyed with copper they have procured for him. As it is easy to convince oneself, a mode of molecular aggregation different from that of the alloy employed in the operation. This agglomeration, taken and preserved by the filings, can only be due to an electric or magnetic state. Particular, developed no doubt by chemical action, aided by solar radiation. I propose to make known, in a later work, the effects of solar light on silver precipitated from its nitrogenous solution by pure copper. It results for me from these experiments the conviction that by means of the electric fluid employed under one of its various states, The transformation of silver into gold will be effected very rapidly. Maximum speed should be achieved only at an elevated temperature, in atmospheres of varying degrees of electricity and heat, but where? However, the heat and the electricity would always preserve between them the same report ratio. It's from even, in fact. That we have managed to bring about the precipitation of copper in the state of fusion in a metallic bath by means of iron, as it takes place at ordinary temperature, by plunging into a solution of copper a pickled iron blade. Although there remains some uncertainty in the results of my processes, the fact remains nonetheless. What harms this discovery? It is that it is in childhood, but every discovery, even those that have stirred the world, have they not also had their period of childhood? What does it need to be accepted? The equivalent of an influential godfather, some high patronage in the world of applied science. Let her find one, and we'll see her develop, grow, finally bear fruit. Perfected processes will not fail him. One will find in it, as one has found for photography, accelerating substances thanks to which the transmutation of metals can take place very rapidly. The process which has worked for me several times in Mexico will receive, I have no doubt, improvements by virtue of which we will be able to operate for sure. So this fruitful industry will achieve all that can be expected of IT, science, arts, and commerce. Why did I not ask, either from the academy or from the public, through the means of the newspapers, an advance of 50,000 francs to go to Mexico to carry out this scientific research on metals, with the aim of to prove authentically that these bodies are composed, that they derive from each other, that they are incessantly perfected in the bosom of the earth, and that the artificial production of precious metals is perfectly in the order of things possible? It said I foresaw that this call would be unsuccessful, that I would not obtain funds, that my time, my efforts, and my advances would be wasted, and that we would scoff at my efforts to boot. However, this sum, I spent it in Mexico to arrive at my discovery. This money, I only asked for my work. As I said in my first memoir, a daguerreotype provided me with the means to do my research with my gear as a photographer-chemist. After as complete a success as I could wish, since I had arrived at the complete transformation money in pure gold, without having expected me it is true, to such a wonderful result, we refused to believe it. The metal chosen as the basis of my research produced at both the success of the operation and the distrust of the world scientist. Perhaps one would have believed me more easily if I had taken as subject of my attempts any other metal, iron for example, and that I had succeeded in transforming it into pure copper. But when I affirm that I have made gold, it is, they say, really too good for it. Believe. It is to whom will throw me and overwhelm me with outrageous sarcasm. But none of this can discourage me. As the believer persists in faith, so will I persist that I will have strength left to work with. When I arrived in Paris, I thought I was on the right track by devoting my savings to perfecting my discovery. I said to myself, when I no longer have the means to continue with my only resources, I will share my work with the Academy, which, no doubt, will hasten to see the facts. This alone will be enough to make me find the means to continue my experiments. Today, the force of things has reduced me to making photograph portraits to survive, while waiting for the report of the commission appointed to pronounce on my decision. Discovery. My opponents applaud this decadence, and it is already in their eyes a proof in their favor against me, but that they do not believe that, for that I give up my discovery. I have what they can't have, the conviction of what I support, the awareness of the reality of my results. She gives me more stronger than all those who deny, without sincerity in their denials. The truth will emerge despite all. A few journalists reporting on the sessions of the Academy deigned to speak of my discovery. I seized the opportunity to sincerely thank them. I have especially to give thanks to M. Victor Munier of the press and to the editor of the scientific part of La Lumière for the words of encouragement by which they engaged competent men to repeat my experiments. If I were sufficiently favored by fortune, I would say to partisans of science, to friends of progress, come work with me. Unfortunately, I cannot offer them only explanations as precise as they may wish. They will help them enough, I am sure, to quickly awaken in them the conviction of the reality of the fact. I don't want anything beyond that. After what, they will, I hope, have the strength to progress alone. I will say to those who, without being well versed in the physical and chemical sciences, would nevertheless like to attempt experiments in the transmutation of metals according to the data which precede. That success can also crown their efforts, practice prevails, and a lot on theory. Practice can always lead to new progress, often to progress completely unforeseen and unexpected. Money must be taken as the basis of experience, for the reasons developed in my second memoir. We can then vary them in several ways. in order to better understand the results and not stray from the truth. That we operate with metals easy to obtain perfectly pure, that one frequently renews comparative experiments, and one will be always brought back on track. If it happened that it deviated from it, I have long pursued the search for a very sensitive reagent, making it possible to ascertain the presence of the most small parcel of ordins of silver, an aqua regia, composed of 12 to 13 parts of pure sulfuric acid and 1 part of equally pure nitric acid, is the reagent on which I have stopped as the most sensitive of all those that I have been given the chance to try. Its handling is a bit long, but he has the advantage to deposit the gold with its natural color and a perfect metallic luster, which makes it possible to distinguish the slightest plot. It is well to observe that when the metals alloyed with silver are in too high a proportion, this reagent is no longer sensitive. In this case, a higher dose of nitric acid should be added. I insist on the need for those who want to engage in experiments of this nature to ensure a highly sensitive reagent. It is such a point capital that often, for lack of having been able to realize minimal results due to the action of chemical or other agents, we reject a good process in itself, because it was not possible to properly appreciate the value, while perhaps we were approaching the desired results. I attach here the list of the objects which compose the material necessary for the experiments of transmutation. This material is not very considerable. You have to own 2 stoves, one with hand, the other with reverberatory, a few retorts and earthenware crucibles, tubes closed at one end with a support, a filter holder, funnels, a few glass retorts, porcelain capsules, experiment glasses, and alcohol lamp. When it comes to chemicals, you need acids pure sulfur, nitric and hydrochloric acid, nitrate of pure potash, manganese peroxide, chlorate of potash, ammonium nitrate, distilled water of the metals. Silver, copper, iron, and zinc, also perfectly pure as possible. As you can see, I reserve nothing for myself. I open the way wide to those who want to walk there with me, but in presence of my deep convictions when the transmutation of metals, accepted in practice, can react with so much energy on the destinies of France. Raising your voice to proclaim my discovery and have it accepted is more than my interest. It is my duty. Fifth memory. Presented to the Academy of Sciences in the session of 10, October 1854. On the transmutation of metals. Summary. 1 of the transmutation into gold of allied silver. 2 experiments made at the Imperial Mint in Paris. 3 the difficulty of bringing metals to a chemically pure state. 4 the demonetization of gold and silver. In my previous communications, I have exposed how, when one projects into the pure nitric acid of filings of pure silver or alloyed with copper, a more or less abundant black deposit always forms, in which, most of the time, we do not recognize the appearance of gold, especially when the production of this metal is too small to distinguish the atoms of artificial gold produced. So that he may not remain doubt in the mind of the operator, carefully decant the clear part. Then add pure sulfuric acid to the tube, 10 to 12 times the volume of the remaining liquid. By heating, the black deposit completely disappears and the liquor becomes perfectly clear. Hold for at least 36 hours the tube in a bath of sand at a temperature of around 300 degrees, rather heat longer than less. The gold not always being deposited, although it exists in the liquor. There is formed without doubt a double salt of silver and gold very stable, which occurs in the presence of both sulfuric and nitric acids and prevents gold from depositing. This, it seems to me, can explain how in 2 experiments made on the same money, in the same circumstances with the same acids, one gives gold while the other gives none. Is this effect due to the presence of oxygenated compounds from the nitrogen remaining in the sulfuric acid? That's what I find hard to believe, having observed several times that the deposit of gold took place while there was still nitrous gas in the acid. I have observed that the narrower the tubes, the more complete the decantation of the nitrate, the more the deposit of gold. Done easily. Metal foils gather all at the bottom of the tube, while if he deposited silver sulfate crystals in the liquor, these copper after 4 successive precipitations. I could easily see the presence of gold in the silver alloyed with copper. If we melt each time the money, the quantity of gold produced will be greater, which would seem to indicate again that certain parts of silver change their molecular state while passing through these variations of temperature, and that these modified parts are more apt to pass to the state of or in the presence of oxygenated compounds of nitrogen. It has been objected to me that gold comes from the copper employed in the precipitation of silver. I tried this same copper in greater quantity than that employed in these successive precipitations, without having been able to obtain the slightest trace of gold. I undertook new experiences for the purpose of obviating these objections. Right away they will be finished. I will let the Academy know. I wonder why the presence of copper would not make it easier for the money to pass in all or partly to a different molecular state, which, under certain influences, for example, under those of compounds oxygenated nitrogen, would promote the fixation of oxygen in these parts, giving them a molecular state similar to that of gold, with the properties of this metal. Why this fixation of oxygen so truly real takes place, would it not occur in a manner inverse to that which is produced in silver assays by cupellation, at the moment when that curious phenomenon called lightning takes place? The interesting work of Mr. Lavoie on the subject cannot leave, it seems to me, any doubt on this fact that silver, at a high temperature, yields to copper the oxygen which it has absorbed in the air at the moment when the temperature drops, and the silver changes to a solid state. Why, I ask, wouldn't an opposite effect have H? Does not chemistry offer examples of similar reactions? I also observe that the presence of iron in small quantity facilitates the production of gold. Experiments made at the Imperial Mint in Paris, in presence of Mr. Lavoie, tester. The sitting began at 1:30 and ended at 3 o'clock. 2 silver alloys free of gold were provided by Mr. Lavoie, one at 900 thousandths, the other at 850 thousandths. A part of each alloy was reduced to filings, then passed to the magnet. 2 centigrams of each filings were projected into nitric acid at 40 degrees. Poured beforehand into the tubes, certain parts of filings only dissolved after prolonged boiling. Then we saw in each tube the presence of a weak, insoluble black deposit, in which it was possible to distinguish the gold produced. The deposit was attributed to coal, iron, and other impurities. In my opinion, this deposit must have contained gold. This experience was not taken further. The rest of each alloy was treated separately by the acid, the one in which there entered a little iron which did not ally, formed a deposit that prevented recognizing if really there had gold production. The other alloy gave low gold deposit. According to the expression of Mr. Lavoie, these are millionths of a milligram. Mr. Lavoie claims that this gold comes from the silver which was not pure. I think it was produced in the reaction. Session started at 2 o'clock, ended at 4 o'clock. 3 silver samples, one of which provided by Mr. Lavoie and 2 provided by me, served to these experiences. I reduced to filings 4 to 5 decigrams of each alloy, which was split into 2 roughly equal parts. Only part of each of the filings was passed through the magnet, then they were introduced into separate tubes and labeled. I poured over the filings pure nitric acid at 40 degrees. The acid was brought to a boil, in order to activate the reaction and shorten the duration of the operation. As in the first session, the training of a black deposit in all the tubes was noted in order to make sensitive the presence of the atoms of artificial gold produced in these reactions. I decanted the part clear. The acid being too concentrated, decantation was difficult because of the formation of crystals of silver nitrate. It was defective, especially on narrow tubes. Then, I poured sulfuric acid pure in the tubes on the black deposit, which has completely dissolved. The tubes had to be placed in a sand bath and brought to a temperature of 300 and some degrees, in the absence of a sand bath. The tubes were placed in a crucible filled with sand and placed near the opening of the bowl furnace. The tubes remained there until the next day at 10 a.m. The fire not having been maintained, the temperature only decreased. The tube's visit did not yield any trace of gold. I recognized at first glance that the temperature had not been warm enough. High, that consequently the gold could not be deposited, since it was kept in solution by the nitric acid existing in the liquor. I took the 2 big ones tubes containing the same silver filings. The acid was brought to a boil. He immediately freed himself from nitrous vapors. After prolonged boiling for nearly 2 hours, gold was deposited in one of the tubes. The other did not provide any traces. The boiling in this last tube had not been as regular as in the other. There's had jolts and acid splashes out of the tube. It can happen that the precipitated gold has been carried away with the acid which has escaped outside. Thus, as I observed in my memoirs, the results of my experiments are not always identical, while operating with the same materials and under the influence of identical circumstances. Before leaving La Monnaie, I had started a 3rd experiment on the deposit which formed in the liquor containing the decantations of the 6 tubes. This deposit was treated as in the other tubes by sulfuric acid brought immediately to the boil and maintained boiling for several hours. The next day, when I arrived at the mint, I was told that the tube was broken. The acid actually ran down the outer walls of the tube, but after a careful examination, I found that the tube was not really broken, and that the acid could only have come from the jolts that had thrown it out. I noticed in the tube of faint gold atoms barely visible to simple sight, but nothing proves that, this time again, the major part gold has not been thrown out of the tube. Mr. Laval then said to me, "You see that there is really no gold produced in any appreciable quantity." "I recognize," I said to him, "that the gold deposited is not in such great quantity than it must have been, which I attribute to the way whose tubes have been heated." I then asked Mr. Laval to heat the 4 tubes in a sand bath, who remained, in order to operate under the same circumstances than those where I operate at Grinnell. Mr. Laval replied, "We have had enough. We know what to expect. When you have safer procedures and you produce appreciable quantities of gold, come to me find. But if I were there, I wouldn't need any more encouragement. What I seek are precisely the means to be able to continue my experiments and perfect my discovery. I will only observe here that when one operates on 2 decigrams of matter, it is very difficult to have appreciable quantities of gold. What I wanted to see is that with money chemically pure, I could produce gold. This is why I insisted so strongly to Mr. Laval to have silver free from any trace of gold. In summary, it seems to me that it has been observed, 1 degree, that certain parts of silver filings remain unattacked in nitric acid, that they dissolve only after a certain time of boiling. 2 degree, that a black deposit constantly forms, more or less abundant. 3, that this black deposit is entirely soluble in the mixture of the 2 acids, nitric and sulfuric. 4, that the mixture of these 2 acids dissolves gold, as an experiment made on a piece of pure gold has shown. In my opinion, they're a dissolution of gold, not disintegration of the metal. 5 degree, that gold is only deposited after prolonged boiling and an abundant release of nitrous vapors. 6 degree, finally, that the gold is deposited in excessively thin films with the luster of the purest metallic gold. 7, as for the capital fact, it is not for me to decide. I believe I must abstain. Mr. Laval, having told me that there was no reason to make a report on these experiments, I have decided to recall them here. In order to clarify in this respect the judgment of people familiar with my work and of those to whom the eye had announced these experiences. What I regret infinitely is that Mr. Laval did not have enough time available to continue and repeat these experiences, which after all were very expensive for me by the waste of my time and by my displacement, since my only means of existence is the product of my work. However, I did not hesitate for a moment on the sacrifices that these experiences would impose on me. This was a great disappointment for me to see that we would neither continue them nor allow me to finish those that were started, where I thought I would meet help and protection. I had only the bitterest of disappointments. I was opposed to the most cruel end of no receive. One begins by finding it difficult, if not impossible, to prepare chemically pure silver, which is quite otherwise impossible for other metals, copper, iron, zinc, etc. The reason is quite simple. To obtain them pure, reagents are used which act on them by modifying their molecular state in a more or less restricted relationship, depending on circumstances which have not been appreciated until now, and which constitute the chance of the operations. These parts thus modified are able to pass to a higher state of inalterability by presence of oxidizing agents. It will be the same for all metals, if we seek to have them in a state of perfect purity. It is a study to be made to seek the causes which thus modify the properties of bodies in order to prevent these molecular alterations from occurring, and to obtain chemically pure metals. Otherwise, it will never be possible to get there. It seems to me, during the passage of a body through these various oxide states, that certain parts of these metals change entirely, especially in the presence of sunlight, but in such small amounts that they are not yet appreciable to our means of investigation. It is up to us to be on our guard, in order to grasp the cause of these variations, to continue or stop them as we wish. This point obtained, the transmutation of metals will become one of the most important arts. According to our way of looking at metals, they must be formed only of hydrogen. Combined with various ways and in various proportions with oxygen, these combinations will form all the metals that exist and that can exist, which will be more or less alterable or oxidizable according to whether they contain a greater quantity of hydrogen, and all the less alterable that it will contain a greater quantity of oxygen. Thus, according to these data on this class of bodies, it will suffice to make a metal perfect from it to absorb under certain conditions oxygen or remove hydrogen from it, and vice versa. To make it less perfect, it will only be necessary to remove from it oxygen or make it absorb hydrogen. The primitive pure metal would therefore be hydrogen, unalterable in its properties. We only know it in the gaseous state. We have not yet been able to solidify it. which would no doubt have shed light on its nature. The water would be a particular liquid metallic oxide, different from others which are solid, just as we have a liquid metal, mercury. While all the others are more or less solid, there is nothing he can do have something strange in this way of seeing that one could, after all, support many other more conclusive facts than are the two states of being of these bodies at the temperature ordinary. The works of the famous Van Mons on the subject, published at Louvain in 1825, show that men of science had already considered the question of metals under the same point of view. The metals that should contain the most hydrogen will be ammonium, potassium, sodium, etc., and those of the same series which must contain the least relative to oxygen will be platinum, gold, silver, etc. This is what is indicated in a way by their density, their low affinity for oxygen, their alterability in the presence of alkaline oxides of the first metals, which, on the contrary, have a low density and a large greed for oxygen. I recognize all the insufficiency of the facts to properly establish this theory of metals, since I do not yet succeeded in extracting oxygen from a metal whatever. Gold, for example, which would have brought him back silver or other metal. Unfortunately, I lack the devices to try experiments for this purpose. It is perhaps not given to science to arrive, but at least I would have liked to have the satisfaction to have, by sufficiently conclusive tests, opened the way to new researches of incalculable scope. Allow me to add here a few words on the probable consequences of this discovery in relation to our interests and the suppression of our gold currency and money. Metals being recognized as compound bodies, drifting from each other, the production of artificial gold observed, our gold and silver currency can no longer maintain. Sooner or later, it will have to disappear from our commercial relations to become a commodity, like all the other products of human industry. There has very plausible reasons to believe that it must be so in the very near future, for the time being. The removal of gold as a currency seems imminent. In the current state of things, this is what we can foresee just by the abundant production gold mines of California and Australia alone, which continue to pour gold beyond measure into the circulation. The production of silver is no longer related either to that of gold or to the cost of extraction, which almost always remains the same for the silver mines. Because silver-bearing veins are of more uniform production than gold-bearing veins, which can hardly be tracked with success, the gold being found only here and there scattered in the ground, a few depths below the Earth's surface. This is what happens in the mines, and especially in the placers, which provide most of our gold, which puts the extraction of this metal within the reach of all the purses. In a word, of every working man, of the more this metal is found in its native state, it is sold as it is extracted from the bosom of the earth. For the extraction of silver, on the contrary, the conditions are very different. These mines are most time productive than at depths of Lu to 200 meters. Several are exploited at more than 500 meters depth. Water depletion requires the use of powerful machines. Moreover, this metal is not pure, it must be purified, which still requires labor long and costly. A large advance of capital is, as we see, necessary to exploit the mine's silver, which considerably restricts the extraction of this very widespread metal, moreover, but little exploited. We would be really surprised at the number of silver mines declared only in Mexico within an interval of 50 years. I could cite 50,000 on which only a small number is exploited. These facts explain how the production of the two precious metals cannot maintain an almost constant ratio. In presence of the exploitation of new gold deposits recently discovered in several parts of the world, and we will probably discover many more. In wherever they occur, as soon as they are known, they will be exploited, and their exploitation may take a considerable extension in a short time. Also, for a long time, the respective value of the two precious metals no longer in the relationship that was awarded in principle. We understand how much the extraction of gold must end up damaging the gold currency, which always retains the same value, regardless of the cost price. Indeed, it is a method to stimulate the extraction of this metal. It's a big bonus which all governments grant to it, but this state of affairs is not stable. It can and must vary from one moment to moment. Let's see where this can lead our personal interests. Right now, don't we see not increase every day the abundance of gold on our markets, to the detriment of the money which disappears from our trade relations? Suppose that the neighboring states of France come suddenly to remove gold as currency from their commercial relations, and to no longer admit it except as a commodity having a variable price. This is what has Provident Holland already done. In this case, we should expect a considerable drop in this metal, which, having only little consumption in the industry, would only have a very limited outlet. Let us judge of the disturbance thrown into the monetary circumstance in the nations which would have the most gold. and which would not have taken the initiative of the suppression of the currency gulden. It seems to me sufficient to call the attention of competent men in my country to this subject, so that they think about the most suitable measures to take in the interest of the nation. Assuming that gold is withdrawn from monetary circulation, which cannot take long, we will not yet have does something other than lessen the harm. But it will always remain as long as we do not eliminate the use entirely of the two precious metals as a monetary representation of values. From the fact that we have succeeded in producing gold artificially, we must also expect that from one day to the other we will produce money, and that in a way advantageous, there is no doubt about it. As soon as these discoveries are recognized and published, the extraction of the precious metals is too expensive not to be promptly abandoned and neglected be replaced by the new industry of the transmutation. Base metals into precious metals, which will allow the copper to pass to the silver state and golden. It will not take long for this industry to become flourishing, as long as active and enlightened men have the courage to set themselves to it, without being stopped by the fear of being called alchemists and fools. Then this art will really begin to progress. The lure of gain that this industry will offer for a long time will cause people to get to work on all sides. It won't be no longer necessary to expatriate to obtain these metals, but at home, within one's family. One can engage in these works, which will become a source of well-being for humanity. It will no longer be necessary to ruin one's temperament to extract from the bosom of the earth these metals which are so rare compared to others found everywhere in abundance. There is, as they say, to bend down to take it. The suppression of money, as money, cannot failing to follow that of gold, without counting here on the transmutation of metals, still regarded by the public as an illusion. But the incessant progress that chemistry makes every day teaches us to purify, to obtain the free state of the precious metals' speaking properties, which can be obtained at prices lower than those of precious metals themselves. These new metals can be advantageously combined with silver. It will be very difficult to recognize the fraud. The counterfeiter would not, after all, be the only culprit. It will be better, I think, to abolish silver coins in good time, and to keep a small change, to facilitate exchanges, only an alloy more suitable than that of billon. The other two metals, silver and gold, would be replaced by paper money, which I shall call mortgage paper, because it shall represent a property as the banknote represents an ingot of gold or silver. I end this presentation here. It will suffice, I think, for the moment, to make clear the seriousness of the question artificial production of precious metals. As you can see, I speak here against my own interests, for the suppression of gold as money will remove much prestige and value to my discovery. The general interest, it seems to me, must come before personal interest. I only aim to make the most of my works, my country, and science. 6 Memory, presented to the Academy of Sciences on December 1854, on the transmutation of metals. The following experiment should serve as a basis for the reality of the discovery of the artificial production of gold. Dissolve in pure nitric acid a new 5-franc coin, although this coin is supposed to contain no gold. It still contains traces of it. You can find more than it actually contained. It is that the gold produced in this reaction is added to the gold existing previously in the part. In this operation, the gold settles in small reddish-brown flakes which swim in the liquor, dilute it with distilled water, then filter this same solution several times in a row in order to extract all the gold. Precipitate the silver by pure glass of copper, fluoride, also known as Cooper's fluoride, reduced of its chloride by hydrogen or by purified sea salt in this case. Wash the chloride with pure water, then with chlorine water, then reduce the chloride by chalk and coal, or again by hydrogen gas. Melt the silver and convert it into shot. By dissolving it in pure nitric acid, you will have a deposit of gold, whatever means you have employed. Filter this dissolution again after having extended it with distilled water. You separate the gold produced. Continue this operation, and as it was said more high, you will still have gold. Repeat it. Even several times in a row, you will always have gold in quantities all the more appreciable as you operate on larger quantities of matter. It will be objected that gold is furnished by copper or sea salt or chalk and coal or the water in which silver is gritted. But then please tell me a way to obtain chemically pure silver. If you can't get this metal free from any trace of gold, then confess, if you do not want to affirm frankly, that it is possible that gold is produced in these reactions, but do not deny the possibility of to do so would be to harm your knowledge. It is true that in the above experiments, we obtain quantities minimal amounts of gold, which are not always in proportion with the amount of money used. I hope before long to explain it. An analysis which must interest science to the point of view of the transmutation of metals is that which has been made by Duke Maximilian of Leuchtenberg, Milan and Reiset, Anouar de Chemie, 1848, page 81. On the black precipitate, which forms when copper nitrate is decomposed by voltaic electricity, and when the trade copper to form the two poles, there is gradually produced at the positive pole a black powder long regarded as impure copper oxide. This powder gave the following metals on analysis: antimony, pewter, arsenic, platinum, gold, silver, lead, copper. 922 U57 40 44 084 54 15 0009 24. Iron, nickel, cobalt, vanadium, sulfur, selenium, oxygen, sand. 0 32 26 0 86 0 64 2 24 1 27 24 84 1 90. It would be useful to repeat this experiment using as pure copper as possible. This metal would be dissolved in pure nitric acid. Then the nitrate of copper would be subject to the action of the battery, the precipitate which would form being carefully analyzed. One would see if really only copper oxide is found there. Otherwise, the experiment would have to be repeated on this same copper, thus purified a second time, again form copper nitrate, then submit it to the action of the battery. If new metals always result from it in a more or less constant proportion, it will be necessary to allow the formation of these metals during the operation. By comparison, we will also have to deal with an equal quantity of the same copper by pure sulfuric acid and examine whether the products obtained are the same, etc. As soon as time permits, I intend to repeat this experiment because electricity, I am convinced, plays a powerful role in these metamorphoses, from the transmutation of metals to the point of view of geology. The metals in the bosom of the earth are not found never alone. They are always associated several together and form, so to speak, families whose individuals have all the more resemblance, analogy, of common physical and chemical properties, that they will be closer relatives. This is in fact what should be if, as I claim, metals form and pass from an inferior to a superior state of inalterability. Likewise, they cannot exist alone. For example, potassium and sodium, which have a high analogy of properties, don't they always meet together in very different proportions? They combine in all proportion, they substitute for each other compounds. Sodium must only be a derivative of potassium. Nickel and cobalt, for example, must also be very close relatives. Iron, copper, silver, and gold, these are metals which, in my opinion, derive from each other. These metals were the main focus of my research. I did not choose them at random. But according to their order of conductivity for heat, as they are classified by M. Despretz, this order also corresponds with that of their hardness. Iron is harder than copper, copper more than silver, silver more than gold, gold more than platinum. Platinum should therefore follow gold. This is what later we will learn from experience. It is necessary to much that their density is in the same ratio. This which would suppose a different mode of molecular aggregation for each of these metals. We cannot. 9. Assert that the densities of the metals as obtained are in the same ratio. I think for have the true density ratio that really exists between the different metals, it would be necessary to be able to obtain them all at the same degree of purity, in the same electricity and heat conditions. For example, getting them all crystallized by a weak voltaic current in liqueurs, also concentrated and at the same temperature. We would then take their density as it would be in the metals thus obtained. Hardening and hammering to which metals are subjected alter more or minus their molecular state. Thus, the crystallized gold that we found in its native state has a much lower density than molten gold. I think if all the metals we know were all obtained with the same degree of purity, it would be easy, a priori, to classify them according to their order of generation, based mainly on their physical properties. M. Dufnoy, Mineralogie de Dufnoy, T3, P199, said, speaking of native gold, crystals are many and varied. They all derive from the cube. Most abundant are octahedra and dodecahedra. They are rarely isolated. Sometimes these crystals are grouped in the form of branches, as I have indicated for copper and silver. Their faces are almost always dull. They are generally rounded, even for samples extracted from veins, and which, consequently, suffered no friction. This arrangement is common to it with several native metals, and the edges of crystals are rounded like those of native silver. These observations further support my way of considering the molecular changes that metals undergo in their various metamorphoses. We know in practice that where we find gold mines, silver mines are not far away, and that gold always contains silver or copper. It is that in nature, the transformations never take place completely. There are always atoms left of the last metal, which undoubtedly serves as leaven, or which acts by its presence by facilitating the passage of the new metal to another superior state of inalterability. But the reverse does not always have to happen. Where money is found, it may well happen that this money does not contain gold, gold being derived from silver. This transmutation may very well not have yet begun, in by virtue of circumstances that we are not yet able to appreciate. This is in fact what practice teaches us. Take the silver that contains the most gold in the mines, it is always closest to the surface of the earth. As these mines get deeper and deeper, they provide less and less gold appreciable, and even end up containing none at all. Gold is found, as I said in my last memoir, only at a shallow depth in the bosom of earth. There are only rare exceptions where gold has been encountered at great depths. These are just such fortuitous cases which must only come from accidental causes. From the fact that gold is found only a little deep below the surface of the earth. It must therefore be concluded that the external agents of the atmosphere are indispensable to the transformation of silver into gold. Is water, this powerful solvent of nature, this mineralizer that I will call, par excellence, which would carry in within it the elements of the transmutation of metals, which, being constantly renewed, would continually bring the nourishment proper to all the individuals of this large family, the elements of the atmospheric air to the different metals it encounters on its way together with the different salts it dissolves. By infiltrating the rocks, the water would allow these bodies to be variously associated with each other, combined in various ways with the metalloids, in the presence of voltaic or magnetic currents and under the influence of the masses, to determine the transmutation of metals into each other, and would give rise in these same circumstances to the transformation of silver into gold. During my visit to Sant Ignacio near Culiacan, I was examining a new silver sulfide mine that had just discovered, where certain parts of silver sulfide were reddish and disintegrated with the appearance beyond rust. Mexican miners called this particular substance quija de oro. Near Cosala, Mr. Gonzalez's silver mine contains a lot of gold. It is shallow. It is in the neighborhood Sulphur Springs. Sulfur and air, like most metalloids, must certainly have a powerful influence on these metamorphoses. Gold is therefore produced by the oxidation of the various silver salts in contact with atmospheric air, dissolved in water, together with the different salts that it dissolves, in the presence of electric currents developed, no doubt, by the action of these salts on each other. Others, Klaproth, under the name of Leclarum, designated alloy native of gold and silver, Mineralogie de Dufresnoy T3, P202, we see, says Dufresnoy, lamellae, which represent the yellow color of gold, while others are yellowish-white, so that by choosing the parts different in color, we would obtain very varied compositions. Isn't that still one of those facts that nature shows us as an example of turning silver into gold? How to design and explain the formation of these varied alloys of these two metals in the same ore, if not by the passage of silver to the state of gold, because certain lamellae were closer to the generating current that I call electric current, which has favored in certain blades the passage of a greater quantity of silver in the gold state, while the others, being further away or receiving only a weaker portion of the current, produced at the same time quantities of gold of increasingly weak. Mr. Dufresnoy says again, same page, the many analyses that have been made of the gold ores of South America by M. Busingal and the minerals of Russia by M. Gustav Rose show that silver and gold replace each other in any proportion, even in crystals. And he adds, this result is natural and must have been foreseen, these two metals being isomorphic. According to the analyses mentioned above, Mr. Dufresnoy observes that the proportions of silver are very variable. The average is about 8 for 100% for Siberian ores, it is 14%. For those in South America, which establishes a remarkable difference between the gold ores of the Old and the New World, although the deposits are in absolutely the same conditions. If this is indeed the air, as I stated above high, which produces the transformation of silver into gold, it would therefore be permitted to admit, from this point of view, that the New World appeared above the waters much more later than ours, assuming that the passage of silver in the state of gold is effected gradually as quickly in the Old as in the New World. One can assign to these parts of continents the respective epoch of their uprising. This is what geologists will be able to determine and verify later, if these data are related to the chronological state of the partial upheavals of the world. Metals are compound bodies. Second part, first memory. The second part of my work aims to research the causes that govern the metamorphosis of metallic bodies inside each other, as we do see. The problem to be solved is one of the most difficult. Despite the results which I have arrived at now, I do not claim to solve completely. I aspire only to discover some of the causes which most powerfully influence these different bodies, and which lead them to modify their molecular state by passing from an inferior state to a superior state of inalterability? If I succeed in taking this part of the metallurgical science of transmutations a step further, I shall find myself sufficiently rewarded. You will perhaps find that it is a great temerity on my part to want to persevere in pursuing this research, when too many elements are missing at the same time. Apparatus and books that I do not have the leisure to consult in the libraries. I expose myself to repeat experiences that may have already been made. In this case, they could have served me and guided me in the experiences that I pursue under a point of view different. This is one more obstacle to my research. Despite this, I will continue my work nonetheless, because I am firmly and deeply convinced. I made gold, I still do every day, in quantity very limited, it is true, by expensive means. But maybe I touch at the moment of delivering to the world, mastering a truly industrial process for making gold, a process coming under the conditions of large-scale industry, as one makes glass or bronze, as M. DeVille is going to do one of these days in aluminum. I do not have to talk to my readers about my position personal. I will limit myself simply to exposing my experiments and the results to which I have arrived, expressing my regret that these experiments are not as complete as they should be, as they would be if I had been able to employ apparatus more suitable for this sort of research. Sunlight, this complex agent, seems to me be, as I have already said, one of the important elements in the work of bodily metamorphosis. It must act on matter by its more or less prolonged action, by communicating to it new electrical and chemical properties, by virtue of which the material molecules can associate in different ways, different proportions, according to particular molecular arrangements for each of the bodies. Sunlight must also act continuously on atmospheric molecules by fertilizing them, that is to say, by making them fit to serve the perfectibility of all living and inanimate beings. Solar light did not powerfully influence all vegetable and animal beings, which it seems to in some way vivify. Likewise, it seems to me that it must act without interruption in the act of the metamorphoses of metallic bodies. This is what determined me to undertake my experiments of transmutation under its influence, I think. That, in addition, it considerably facilitates and activates certain chemical reactions. In this second part of my experiments, I do to intervene solar light with the aim of trying to determine its action in the act of transmutations. From one part by comparing them to the experiments carried out in the shelter of the influence of light, on the other by comparing its effects to those of the electric spark, of the voltaic and magnetic current in these same experiments. Here is the summary of the questions that this second part will deal with. 1. What is the prolonged action of sunlight on dry and humid confined gases, either isolated, or mixed, or combined with each other? 2. What is the prolonged influence of the electric spark of the voltaic and magnetic current on these same gases alone and in the presence of platinum foam? 3. What is the prolonged action of sunlight on confined dry and humid gases in the presence of single metals and alloys between them? Repeat these same experiments away from sunlight. 4. What is the prolonged action of the voltaic current and magnetic in these same experiments, placing the metals in the voltaic circuit? 5. Subject minerals to these same experiments as they are found in the mines. 6. Check the influence of temperature, which certainly must perform a wide variety of actions on the walk and the results of these different experiments. We need suitable equipment to be able to produce in these tests of transmutation of the temperatures being able to be raised gradually by maintaining them at a constant degree throughout the duration of the experiment. It is through these trial and error operations that we will manage to grasp the suitable temperatures to arrive with certainty of the results one wishes to obtain. Beyond that, we will never have a safe way to proceed with security. Caloric is an incalculable force which acts infinitely on matter and which modifies its state. This force acts in most cases like it would make sunlight. Also, I think that one can be replaced by the other by applying it suitably. Caloric and electricity are two imponderable agents of incalculable forces which act continually in the work of the metamorphoses of bodies. It is by the application of these forces to metals in the presence of oxygenated compounds of nitrogen which will solve the problems of the transmutation of metallic bodies into each other. My means do not allow me to undertake at the same time all these experiences. I will focus mainly on those which were the basis of my first works. Most of the experiments I undertake, or have more range, should be extended longer and be done with all possible care. Insufficient time often leads to negative results which could have subsequently become positive. So I will not be put off by these first attempts when even they would not be crowned with the success that I hold on. Here are some of the experiments I have undertaken at ordinary temperature. They were extended for over a year. 1. Re-experiment. I suspended in a bottle of a liter filled with wet oxygen a piece of thousandths fine silver, using a platinum wire which I fixed with a little shellac to the lower part of the emery plug. The closed device remained exposed to sunlight after 6 weeks. The grunt of silver had taken on a slightly yellowish tint in certain parts. These parts continued over time to take on an increasingly dark shade at the end of 6 months. They had acquired a yellowish red tint such as iron oxide. During the last 6 months of the duration of the experiment, the color of the oxide no longer exchanged. The oxidation did not spread over the entire surface of the shot, some parts of which remained with the luster and brilliance of silver. This feature made me led to think that the oxidized parts are those which have been in contact with the fingers. No doubt that the fatty and acid part which has adhered to the silver has condensed oxygen in the parts of which it has determined the oxidation. This oxide, to be reduced by heat, required a higher temperature than the ordinary oxide. The experiment passed through the black coloration before the silver had regained its natural whiteness. 2-week experiment. I suspended, by a means analogous to the preceding one, in a bottle stoppered with emery, a small tube closed by one end containing fine silver precipitate. The experiment lasted the same time as the previous one, without has had oxidation of the silver, which has kept the same luster all the time. I observed that it dissolved more difficulty in nitric acid. 3E and 4E experiment. I repeated the 2 experiments in nitrous oxide. The silver shot was suspended as before. It oxidized in only a few parts that have faded to pale yellow and have not darkened in color as in the first operation. I attributed the formation of the oxide to the Kidd cause, which had produced the oxidation of silver and oxygen. The fine silver precipitated from its acid nitric solution by pure copper, then washed and dried, was suspended in nitrous oxide. It has not oxidized. It has preserved throughout its primitive brilliance. This even silver, treated with nitric acid, dissolved without evolution of gas. 5E experiment. I repeated the previous experiment in wet nitrous oxide. The silver has dissolved without being able to distinguish the formation of nitrous gas. The bottle was perhaps badly corked, which will have allowed the formation of nitrous gas by the entry of oxygen and hence the dissolution of money. Experiences made under the influence of the current voltaic. 1ER experiment done away from direct sunlight. I suspended by means of a platinum wire a gram of fine silver shot in a 3-way balloon tubing filled with wet oxygen. Through the 2 side pipes I passed the poles of 2 elements of Bunsen. The poles came to end within a few millimeters of the silver. After a month, the money had taken in all its parts a uniform shade of one color amber yellow. I continued this experiment for another fortnight without observing any particular phenomenon. The oxidation of the silver not having changed color, I disassembled the device. The weight shot had increased by 5 milligrams. I continued the operation again after filling the oxygen bag and loading the stack again. After 3 weeks, the device having been dismantled, the silver weight had not noticeably increased in weight. Its color had become only a little darker. 2R experiment. I replaced in this experiment oxygen by nitrous oxide. The apparatus remained the same after 15 days. The silver was oxidized and had the same color as in the previous experiment. I continued the operation another 8 days. The money weight had increased by 6 milligrams. I renewed the gas and charged the battery again. After 2 weeks, the device having been dismantled, the money weight had not significantly increased in weight. The oxide was only having become darker in color. It was denser and less attackable by simple acids, sulfuric and nitric, than that of the preceding experiment. 3R and 4R experiments. I repeated the 2 operations previous under the influence of sunlight with a single Bunsen couple. The oxidation of silver proceeded more rapidly in these 2 experiments, and it is again in nitrous oxide that it took place more rapidly. The oxide formed had also darker in color in nitrous oxide than in oxygen. Oxidation also stopped after a few days, as in previous experiments, is that the oxide forms a kind of varnish insoluble which prevents further oxidation deeply. 5R and 6R experiments, I placed in the course of a voltaic circuit of a Bunsen couple. A piece of fine silver shot of 0.745 milligrams in confined oxygen. The experiment took place under the direct influence of sunlight. The oxidation of silver was much faster than in previous experiments. After 8 days, the whole piece of silver had turned completely black. After 15, the device was disassembled. The silver had increased by 8 milligrams. I started the operation again and continued it again another 15 days. The weighed silver shot had increased by 5 milligrams. I prolonged the experiment for 3 weeks by renewing the gas and the acid, and after this time, the weighed shot had not increased than a milligram 1/2. I treated the silver shot with sulfuric acid pure when cold. A few gas bubbles were released at the beginning, but the oxide did not dissolve at all. I removed the shot after washing it with pure water. I immersed it in pure nitric acid at 40 degrees. The oxide has in no way dissolved, only it has detached itself from the shot. This oxide, treated with the mixture of two acids, sulfuric and nitric, dissolved immediately. This same experiment having been repeated in nitrous oxide, the silver oxidized even more rapidly, and the oxide produced was denser and blacker than that obtained in oxygen. It was less attackable by acids, but also soluble in the mixture of the two acids. This same experiment being repeated in nitrous oxide, always placing the silver in the circuit voltaic. It oxidized very quickly without offering anything particular in the course of the operation which took place, noticeably faster than in the previous experience. In these three experiments, the oxidation of silver began to develop on the protruding parts of the shot, which quickly turned black, while the hollow parts which turned greenish-pink, then to violet, which has darkened in color by the action of time, but without acquiring the same intensity as in the tips and other salient parts. These three experiments were repeated in my laboratory. Much longer was consecrated. However, the oxide formed has not acquired the same properties than that obtained under the influence of the sun. I have noticed that the silver oxide obtained in oxygen, in protoxide and deutoxide of nitrogen, under the double influence of the voltaic circuit and of light solar, requires to be reduced at temperature of increasingly high. The parts that are the last to dissolve are those which are oxidized first. The oxide also becomes more and more insoluble in the simple acids, sulfuric and nitric, to a degree that the oxides obtained in these same experiments in the shade of sunlight always require a temperature higher to be reduced than the oxide obtained by ordinary processes. Having been able to obtain only small quantities of oxides by these means, I propose to repeat these experiments by operating on silver filings subjected to the influence of the voltaic current, which will enable me to obtain both a greater quantity of oxide and to make new experiments on this oxide obtained by these various means. I hope to soon present to the Academy a second memory which will include part of my other experiences which I have been continuing for a long time and which are approaching their end. They will put, I have no doubt, in a new light the possibility of the transmutation of silver into gold. That is to say, the whole phenomenon disputed for so long and henceforth indisputable of the transmutation of metals. Metals are compound bodies. Second part, second memory. Artificial production of gold by oxidation of sulfides. Decomposing pyrites almost always provide gold is a well-known fact, which I have had occasion to observe in several regions of Mexico, especially near Zapotran El Grande, where there is a mountain of decomposing iron sulfide. Their river, which passes at the foot of this mountain, carries gold in large enough quantities to give rise, in the rainy season, to a lucrative exploitation. In the region of Guanajuato, near the mines of Luz, where there are also decomposing pyrites, meets veins of gold. In truth, they are not wealthy, but they confirm the fact that in the neighborhood pyrites you can almost always see the presence of gold. I was able to ascertain that these pyrites contain traces of silver sulfide. In my opinion, it is the sulfide which most directly produces gold. Other sulfides can experience the same transmutation, but more slowly, by a longer work, and generally by passing through different intermediate stations, while the sulfide of silver passes directly to the state of gold. In the first part of my memoirs on the transmutation of metals, I mentioned the silver sulfide mine of M. Gonzalez, near Cozala, as one of the mines of this sulfide, the richest in gold in all of Mexico. This shallow mine is close to sulfurous hot springs. The transformation of silver sulfide in gold must certainly be favored by the rise in temperature produced by the proximity of these thermal waters. Guided by these observations, I undertook a series of experiments with the aim of ascertaining whether really in the decomposition of sulfides gold is produced. 5 of these experiments were begun in 1852. Of this number, only 2, the second and the third, could be brought to give a result. 2 experiment. I formed a mixture of the substances following: pulverized silica 30 parts, alumina 20 parts, iron, copper 15 parts, 15 parts, silver 20 parts. To these substances obtained in their greatest possible state of purity before operating the mixture, I added sulfur flour. Then I heated it to release the excess sulfur. I have divided matter again, and I have left for 2 months exposed to contact with the air. At the end of this time, I watered it with sharpened water of 15% nitrous acid. I took care to weigh from time to time to give access to air, and I maintained the whole thing constantly moist by sprinkling it with the same liquid. After a while, the material oxidized, formed crystals, sulfates, metals in the presence. Matter has taken on a green hue. So that the oxidation was as complete as possible, I continued to operate in the same way for a whole year. Only then did I submit the material to a test carried out on a small scale. I obtained appreciable traces of gold. I subjected the material to a heat strong enough to decompose the sulfates formed in the first part experience. I added flour again, sulfur in sufficient quantity to transform into whole sulfide material. I started the experiment again and continued it as I had just exposed it without making any modification. I repeated all the same manipulations 3 times. The matter tested by mercury gave me, out of 100 parts of silver, 0.0012 of gold. 3E experience. For this experiment, I used the same substances in the same proportions as for experiment 2. I dissolved altogether metals in pure nitric acid. I added to the solution the pulverized silica and alumina. I passed through the liquor a current of hydrogen sulfide until complete precipitation of dissolved metals. I evaporated to dryness, then I exposed the material in contact with air. The silica and the alumina have facilitated the division of the sulfides, and, consequently, the access of the air in the mass. My goal was to activate the oxidation and to check at the same time if the presence of silica and alumina would not promote transmutation. After 6 weeks, I sprinkled the matter with a little nitric acid extended 15 parts of water. I continued this manipulation as in the previous experiment. When the mass was completely oxidized, I tried it. The gold seemed to me to be in a lower quantity than in experiment N2. I added enough water to dissolve all the soluble salts which had formed. Then I passed a stream of hydrogen sulfide through the solution to convert metals back to sulfides. I evaporated the excess liquid and continued the operation as above. I repeated this same operation 3 times without having had to point out any peculiarity in its progress. The material, tested as before by distilled mercury, furnished me, out of 100 parts of silver, 0.0010 gold. The result of experiment none was lost. I had increased, for this experiment, the proportion of silica and alumina and decreased that of the metals after having sulfurized the material. I passed through it on different occasions a current of protoxide and deutoxide of nitrogen, alternating it with a current of air. Experiment N4 had the same fate as experiment none. I had added to the previous mixture of zinc and antimony with a little lime and potash. The metals had been dissolved in nitric acid. The operation had to be continued as in the previous experience. Experiment N5 was undertaken under slightly different conditions. As in experiment N3, I only operated on iron, copper, and silver, removing silica and alumina in order to ascertain whether they contributed, yes or no, by any action whatsoever to the act of transmutation. It is with a pain that experimenters will easily understand that I have seen these experiments go to waste. I could gather valuable data from it, from which I shall have operated more surely. But something has happened to me which unfortunately happens too often for long-term experiments when the one who undertakes them is not master of his time. Man proposes and business disposes. What made me finish sooner than I should have to arrive at a better result? The 2 experiments of which I have just given a very summary account. It is the fear of seeing by prolonging them. My devices break. By repeated tests at different times during the course of these experiments, I have convinced myself that as the quantity of gold increases matter, the quantity already produced activated its new production. There's therefore has everything to gain to continue and prolong the operation. He can't longer remain no doubt about this fact that in the oxidation pyrites, gold is produced daily, but that this gold only appears when the transmutation of the metallic parts, modified in their molecular state, is complete. However, it often happens that these modified parts in the decomposing pyrite are carried away by the waters in the course of a river neighbor, or the transformation of a metal into a other. The continual movement that water procures for these molecules must greatly facilitate this operation by enabling them, in their course, to decondense the quantity of gas proper to the accomplishment of this metamorphosis. This would explain why we does not always see the gold on the very site of the pyrite deposit, because the materials there are not always conducive to the completion of this phenomenon. The materials used in my experiments and the proportions of these materials were chosen and determined somewhat at random. It is only by repeating the manipulations that we will arrive at more certain data, and that we will better know the most suitable bodies to activate the phenomenon of transmutation. The presence of chlorides, bromides, iodides, and that of sulfur alloyed with metals are simple intermediaries whose role is to activate the transmutation, the condensation of gas which takes place in the material and gives it the form of the metal most perfect in producing gold. This is what I propose to do, again more evident through new experiences. No matter, I am advancing slowly towards the goal, but I am advancing. From the experiments that I am pursuing, I hope that before long artificial placers will be composed for the production of gold, just as nitriers are formed artificial, basically. One is not more difficult than the other. As we do for the nitriers, we will bring in the atmospheric air, from which we receive so much, and where everything returns. It is up to us to promote its action on the materials that we want to transmute. Only him will do the rest at his expense, in a time whose duration, more or less long, will vary according to the temperature, the nature of the bodies that we will have brought together, or the environments in which we will have brought this universal agent into play. By multiplying and varying experiences of transmutations, we will infallibly encounter the means to operate promptly. Then the profits can be huge. I am convinced that if one operated on soil suitably suited to these sorts of transmutations, one would tend to better results than by operating in earthen vessels, in which the action of magnetic currents is weak or almost nil. But the action of these currents must be for much in the changes of the molecular state of matter, which allows it to absorb or condense new quantities of gas, and thus to acquire properties entirely new. Properties that will only change when its molecular state will be broken by its passage into a new genus. Of the train with which the progress of the sciences proceeds, which had their century ago asked for 50 years and more, for the practical use of a fruitful idea. 10 of our days can be achieved in less than 10 years, especially if the efforts made to this end are encouraged by a premium of significant value. For me, if I happen to see the creation, in the plain of Grinnell, of a factory where we would compose artificial placers for the production of gold, placers first equal and later much superior in wealth to those of California, I declare that I won't be surprised. Because, in my belief, all places of the world are destined to one day remain well in back of this industry, currently in its period of incubation. With my ardent and firm convictions, it's a big heartbreaker for me to have only one limited time to devote to these experiments, which have so many charms and so much future for the human race. I do not doubt, I have never doubted, that the alchemists could certainly make gold, make a lot of it, and achieve colossal fortunes. Their secret died with them. It will no longer be so for anyone. Everyone will be able to make gold, but by various processes, some with loss, others with profit. The whole question is there. For a long time yet, the solution of the problem will be in the manipulations. Allow me to mention here a very worthy fact of remark, and which coincides completely with my ideas. Since new refining processes which date back about half a century have made it possible to remove the gold contained in the old silver coins, great benefits have been realized by those who have practiced and great this refinement. Pieces after the introduction of these processes only contain traces of gold. It's due less what those who presided over their manufacture thought. How is it then that today we are again looking for our silver coin, that we are asserted that it no longer contained gold, and that profits are made by nevertheless withdrawing new quantities of gold, which means that day by day our silver currency disappears from circulation? The fact cannot be denied. Without departing from the purely chemical point of view of the question, I point out that those who melt silver coins to extract gold from them operate a veritable transmutation. Artificial gold is produced and added to the gold already existing in the coin. This is how, despite costly manipulations, the melting and refining of silver coins yields high profits. We do not foresee a term to that state of affairs which, by the improvement of processes for transmutation, can only take longer expanding day by day. It leads, as I have foreseen in the first part of my memoirs, to the demonetization of gold, a fact already accomplished in Holland, then to the demonetization of silver. Metals precious will cease to be the sign of values. They will simply be merchandise, and the sun will not rise any the less in its time. In the meantime, the art of transmutations, this art which must so deeply stir the world, progress and advance towards its industrial period. So we try to deny it? Conference, made in Paris, March 16th, 1889. Gentlemen, encouraged by the kind reception given by the public at my first lectures, despite some criticism bitter who mingled with it. I come to you today, thank you for your kind assistance, and I promise you to spare nothing to deserve it more and more. It is why. Gentlemen, I appear again before you to give you further proof of the reality of my discovery and its importance. Gentlemen, you know that I am neither a charlatan nor one of those lawless men who make money from everything. I only want and seek one thing, the glory and happiness of my country. Humble disciple of Hermes of the Paracelsus and the Van Helmonts, I pride myself on the title of alchemist, a title once synonymous with a sorcerer. A title. 11. 8. Difficult to bear, dangerous even to sustain during this long series of centuries of ignorance and superstition, where any chemical phenomenon passed for the work of the devil. Centuries in certain respects not worthy of regret, where a simple maker of matches would have been burned alive on a bonfire lit with the products of his industry. Yes, gentlemen, I am an alchemist. I made gold. I still do every day. In very limited quantities, it is true, and under the conditions of a laboratory experiment. But I may be nearing the moment of delivering to the learned world a process for making gold under the conditions of large-scale industry, as one makes glass. Bronze, as M. Deville succeeded in making gold. Aluminum, as we do today magnesium. For almost 50 years, I have been fighting to make known this truth of artificial gold, based on an undeniable fact. Taken to pity by some, derided by others, harshly rebuffed by those who seemed best suited to welcome me. Today, I find myself wondering, what should I do? What should I say? After all my affirmations of sincerity remain sterile. The disbelief towards me is so great that we block our mouths' ears so as not to hear, and that we close our eyes not to see. So much one is fanaticized by this gold. One does not want to hear anything that could affect its value, to his power. In a word, he is a God whom we adore. It will, however, be necessary to face the evidence of this capital fact of the artificial gold, which has too much importance so that it can go unnoticed. Imaginations are at work and minds are in search of progress, said he a few weeks to General February in his farewell to his soldiers. Woe to him who stops on the way, he is quickly left behind. Born you never linger on the way, take the lead of the movement and never leave it. This wise and patriotic advice prompted me to advertise this lucky find that I have long kept hidden from the public. Moreover, arrived at the decline of the age, I believed that my conscience made me a duty to speak loudly, which is why I dare to appear before you today. Gentlemen, to show you my principles on the transmutation of metals. They got me leads to a long and perilous journey, to laborious research, and finally to an unexpected discovery whose consequences, still undetermined, promise our country a brilliant future of glory and prosperity. The starting point of my convictions and my research on the transmutation of metals, the key to everything the system is the unity of matter. This idea that matter is one as essence as the will of its creator, and that all bodies admitted as simple bodies for scholars are those whose decomposition cannot be pushed further. This idea, I say, is in my view perfectly rational. In reality, there are no simple bodies any more among the metals than among the other bodies. There's to matter one in its essence, subject to laws partly unknown, partly known, and applied at will by human knowledge, laws by virtue of which matter shows itself to us in sometimes variable, sometimes permanent forms. There is nothing moreover. Such was the basis of the doctrines of the alchemists of old, and the scholars of our day come to agree that on this point, as on many others, the alchemists were right. These ideas are still so rare in the world, they overthrow so many theories currently in possession of science, if this expression is permitted, that I need to rely on the authority of a great name, Lavoisier. One of the fathers of modern chemistry, who, not daring to fully confess his convictions on also a subject scabreux, gave them a glimpse by showing where his uncontested theory of caloric leads. We know that Lavoisier was the first to designate the unknown force by this name, and mysterious which produces on our organs the sensation of hot and cold, which dilates the bodies by its presence and makes them pass through the three states, solid, liquid, and gaseous. But Lavoisier points out that by raising only to 100 or 120 degrees, the average temperature beyond surface of the globe J water disappears. No more ocean, no more lakes or rivers, it's all part of the atmosphere, plus vegetation, no more animate beings. Heat one more little, streams of lead, zinc, and bismuth go flow like water. Continue to raise the temperature, there is not one so high that one cannot suppose susceptible of a higher degree. A time will come where the earth will be in the state of igneous fusion through which it has evidently passed. Heat again, the igneous liquid will become a mass of incandescent vapors with a nucleus like comets. Then an assembly of extremely thin vapors like those of nebulae. Finally, only a few thousand degrees. Parametric, there will be only molecules so divided that it will be possible to doubt their existence. Suppose the decrease of the caloric in direction inverse, you will successively have a nebula, a comet, a planet, finally in all the conditions where we see ours today. If their will of the Creator, by the action of a single force, caloric, can cause matter to undergo all these transformations, what becomes of simple bodies and compound bodies in all this? Wasn't it, as far as one could affirm implicitly in this time, the unity of matter? If matter is one, if science can make it take so many different forms at will, why should one step would it not allow also to reproduce at will the forms of the various metals, especially those of the metals precious? I have related above my struggles and my labors since 1848, arrived after 30 years of the most obstinate labor to acquire a modest fortune. I resolved in 1885 to resume my work on gold and lead it to good end. In 1885, I wrote a letter to M. Berthelot that remained without answer. Not yet believing the time had come to speak, I continued my work in the silence of inverse. You will successively have a nebula, a comet, a planet, finally in all the conditions where we see ours today. If their will of the Creator, by the action of a single force, caloric, can cause matter to undergo all these transformations, what becomes of simple bodies and compound bodies in all this? Wasn't it, as far as one could affirm implicitly in this time, the unity of matter? If matter is one, if science can make it take so many different forms at will, why should one step would it not allow also to reproduce at will the forms of the various metals, especially those of the metals precious? I have related above my struggles and my labors since 1848, arriving after 30 years of the most obstinate labor to acquire a modest fortune. I resolved in 1885 to resume my work on gold and lead it to a good end. In 1885, I wrote a letter to M. Berthelot that remained unanswered. Not yet believing the time had come to speak, I continued my work in the silence of my laboratory. Finally, finding in my new experiments in support of my discovery a fact called to shed light on the phenomenon of transmutation metals, I filed in June of last year a sealed envelope to the Academy of Sciences on the new due. It was then that I addressed my country in writing first to the members of the Budget Committee, then to the senators and deputies. I come today to insist more particularly on you. Gentlemen, for you help out. From my point of view, the reactions under the influence of which the transformation of metals takes place constitute a complex phenomenon in which the principal role belongs to the atmospheric elements. They are the ones who operate daily these metamorphoses of which we cannot follow the course, so slow are the effects, starting with potassium and sodium and ending with the precious metal silver, gold, and platinum. The air must act first by its simple elements, then by its combined elements. The second agent essential to all these metallic transformations is water, the great solvent of nature constantly renewing itself, always in motion, whom I will call the foster mother par excellence of all bodies. She undertakes to provide by herself the nourishment proper to all mineral individualities. Indeed, we see it rising in this atmosphere in a state of purity to draw its elements. Oxygen and nitrogen and other bodies which are there in minimal quantities. All the molecules of these different bodies are more or less modified by the stars, especially by the sun, which comes to vivify them and make them suitable to be assimilated to these different beings according to their age, to constitute this great family of the mineral kingdom. This water descending on earth will be charged with new substances, nitrates of potash and soda and others. Then continuing its work, it will pour over the thin layer of humus. Then the alluvial soils where it will begin by providing food to these beings that she will meet on his way. She then enters the rocks metalliferous, associated with various other bodies, chlorides, pyrites, carbonates, and they will meet with alkaline nitrates from which chemical reactions will result, electric. And magnetic currents are going to happen. These rocks will be decomposed. Of these different bodies present, under pressure and various temperatures, multiple reactions, dissociations of some of these bodies will occur. Others will give up an excess of their combination, all these elements in their nascent state in the presence of their mineral individualities, will enable them to absorb the proper elements to their perfection and to pass from one age to another of inalterability, until they arrive after several stations at their last degree of perfection. These reactions being constantly renewed by the current continual flow of this generative liquid of all families. Nitrogen seems to act in combinations like would act as a ferment in the transformations of materials organic. Under the influence of this agent, the fixation of oxygen, its more or less durable combination with the radical, will take place there. Here for me is the key to the transformation of metals, and everything leads me to believe that the radical is hydrogen. Whether these theoretical ideas are right or wrong, that's what I will not undertake to discuss here. I believe I have to confine myself to saying that without it having been possible for me to acquire the mathematical certainty of their reality, their influence presided over my experiments. Their probability in my eyes was born from the effects noted during several years of observations. If I mention it here, it is to do better understand the walk I followed, and perhaps throw some clarity on the road along which those who, in my opinion, follow the same order of research will walk. In this capital experiment, artificial gold, indeed, there has been a reaction, which is in disagreement with the chemical facts known to date. Here, exceptional circumstances have generated a new phenomenon for science. As long as we cannot not clearly specify the causes, the art of transmutation will hardly progress. So what do you need for that? Popularize experiences, repeat them ad infinitum, vary them the circumstances. It is by this that one will arrive at a process certain to operate a complete transmutation of a metal in another. The whole question is there. To study by practice joined to theory, we will find the key to the mystery. Then the transmutation of metals will be the thing simplest in the world. It is to achieve this goal. Gentlemen, that the means fail me, I am arrested on all sides in my experiences, having no laboratory where I can to do conveniently with a chance of success. Having at my disposal only a few tubes and clubs, modest, completely insufficient accessory, not having any apparatus for studying. Enjoying and recording all the circumstances that may arise in a reaction of this kind, it is by carefully observing and meticulous that we will arrive, by modifying the devices as well as the circumstances, to find the way forward to arrive at the desired goal. This admission of impotence will not surprise you. You know how I was taken away one after the other, all the means that could have provided me with resources to pursue my work and bring it to a successful conclusion. Of the more it is an unfortunate point of resemblance to the inventors who preceded me. None of them, that I know of, has perfected his invention with his own means, and too often they do. Lost of fruit, exhausted as they were by the expenses they had done, or discouraged by unbelief or public carelessness. In this report, gentlemen, I don't think I'll ever be like them. They won't tire me, they won't discourage me, and I dare to hope, Mole, at my discovery, we will not be suffocated. I have faith in the future because I am firmly convinced. I am made of gold. As long as I am seconded, I will make more. I will do a lot. I will do it by processes coming within big industry, and when I get there. Gentlemen, of the abyss into which we are threatened with fall, from one day to the next. 1 kilo of pure copper, for to be transformed into a kilo of pure gold, requires little cost judging from the results I have obtained. There are only expenses for the raw material: acid, fuel, and labor. I put everything at worst at 150 francs. This price can easily be reduced by half when we operate on a medium scale. This, which will put the net price per kilo at 75 francs instead of 3.444 FR, 44 cents is worth today. Profit net, 33,369 francs. Isn't it beautiful enough to bother to take care of it? You can judge by this the cataclysm that this discovery will bring to the whole world, when we can produce gold 40 to 50 times cheaper than it is worth today. Thus, a person who would have 50,000 francs in gold will only have a round number value of 1%, ou franc, and that will not be the last word. So what are we waiting for? You have to be ready for any event. It is not by running away from the difficulty that you will manage to solve it, that we can be in control of the situation. For a long time it has been a fire that has been smoldering under the ashes. It only takes a spark to make it burst. No one then cannot stop its progress, which will be rapid. Do not doubt it. We will be forced, in spite of ourselves, to suffer consequences that will be terrible if we do not arrive first to mitigate the effects. We will only have to curse ourselves for having disbelieved the voice of truth. Allow me, gentlemen, to remind you here of the judicious words of M. Richer in the Scientific Journal of March 18th, when speaking of the progress made in certain neighboring nations. We would have to imitate these nations, which unfortunately for us are becoming more powerful day by day. The secret of this power, constantly growing, should not be sought elsewhere than in the association of more and more intimate with science and industry. Unfortunately, we are too personal, and this defect prevents us from arriving in time, because our existence is too short to bring an idea to fruition. Fair and recognized to be able to put it into practice and to take advantage of it while enriching society, we are too late. What I want above all is that we see the fact of artificial gold. This is for me the essential point. I do not am neither a jumper nor a fooler. I don't want my good faith to be questioned and people to be able to say that I have sought to deceive my country. So you have to be convinced by experience that I am advancing, and if what I presented to you at the Academy is not gold artificial, it is useless to continue my research. Gentlemen, I walk with difficulty, impelled as I am by this constant fear in my mind that I may be overtaken. This is what I would like to avoid in the interest of my country. This is what gave me the strength to come here in order to draw your attention, in particular, to the seriousness of this question of artificial gold, which is an indisputable truth. To finish, gentlemen, I will tell you that it is not enough for me to be convinced of what I'm advancing. You must all be convinced. Knowing the truth is not only your right, but it is even your duty, because there goes your most sacred interests. If all my steps have been in vain so far, it is not a reason for you to leave it there. So it is up to you to demand from your representatives that the light be shed on this discovery. Here, gentlemen, we all have only one goal, the fatherland. So I appeal to you. Gentlemen of the press, you who have all the necessary knowledge to appreciate the advantages and the dangers of present and future which is made for us by this discovery, and all the dangers which can result from it for our fatherland, if we are preceded by a nation neighbor who will certainly take advantage of this to our detriment. So let us not be surprised, and that is why I come today, fulfilling a duty, to appeal to your patriotism to find from you a generous and powerful support, so that all those who have confidence in me and my discovery honor me with an essential donation for the continuation of my work for the benefit of my country. I am also addressing you, gentlemen, students, bourgeois, merchants, and workers, so that you lend your moral support through the generous spirit of your just and clear-sighted minds, not imbued with the prejudices of time. You will soundly judge the value of this fact of artificial gold, and will seek to prevent the dangers that can run the fatherland if the foreigner precedes us. Let us always remember the noble words of General February. Woe to him who stops on the way. Tiffereau. 130, Rue de Théodore Grenelle, Paris, le 9 juin 1889. Dear Sir, Paris, June 9th, 1889. The conformity of your ideas and mine on the unity of matter has brought us into contact. There's something time I had the opportunity to hear you in one of your conferences, Boulevard des Capucines, and I was able to endorse your assertions announcing that the metals are compound bodies, and which it is possible to produce by synthesis and the chemical and electrochemical reactions of artificial gold like any other metal. This is also my opinion, and since you ask me, I will relate the facts and experiences on which it is based, as well as the conclusions that I believe I can draw from them. The problems to be solved in the order of ideas or I am on mineral and metallic materials have preoccupied me since my beginning as a civil engineer of mines. From my leaving the school and throughout my long career as director of the metallurgical sites in Commentry and Montlawn, Fumel, etc., and dependent coal mining operations. For a long time, I could only use a few hobbies for my favorite studies. But there several years ago, having been affected by progressive paralysis from which I was only able to recover after a year, and forced to give up my work active as a mining engineer and metallurgist. I was especially concerned for about 4 years with the great question of the unity of matter. First as a system and means of reducing the expense of experiments and facilitating my studies, work, and demonstrations, I left the production of the precious metals almost aside. And I hardly occupied myself except with the production of copper, thinking, I believe it with just reason, that the question of copper being solved, this solution will lead to all the others. However, it happened to me several times to notice the production of silver and gold, and very often that of zinc and that of aluminum in the state of alumina. In summary, after trial and error and experimentation, for so to speak without number, attested and verified by their minutes, I got to produce copper at laboratory under conditions which seemed to me likely to be applied industrially. But in order to determine the genesis of this metal, as of any other no doubt, it is essential that it pre-exists in a soluble state in chemical baths where it must form under the influence of special reagents, so that the production of metal takes place by increase, as it happens, for example, for plant materials. I will add that the intervention of certain fertilizing materials seems useful, if not necessary, as well as certain conditions of heat, light, electricity, of time, etc., always as for the increase of plant materials. The metallic growth is variable according to the method with which the operation is carried out, so I was able to obtain metallic increments exceeding Lu for 100%, and I have reason to hope for double. On the other hand, by operating too quickly and bluntly, the metallic growth is insignificant, or does not occur. Finally, the metal coming from the metallic increase appears to be at first in a nascent state, and then it does not exhibit all the reactions and properties of the metal adult. It may even disappear in whole or in part. But we manage to fix it and bring it to the adult state under the influence of certain chemical reactions. Accept, dear sir, the assurance of my distinguished consideration. Lebrun de Verloy, Scientific and Comparative Study on Artificial Gold. Having been put in touch with M. Tiffereau in one of his first lectures on the unity of matter in the Salle Prel on February 16th, 1889, I was charged by a business group interested in the question to check the nature of the artificial gold in comparison with raw and purified metal samples. Established by chemical analysis and study of the properties micrographs that a gold sample is natural or artificial is an impossible CHPSE at first sight. Because if the samples are the same metal and to the same degree of purity, they must give reactions absolutely identical and similar or analogous crystallographic forms. If I permitted the insertion in this volume of the note science that will follow, is that we find a curious fact which, unfortunately, while explaining nothing, throws a new light on the artificial production of one metal by derivation of another. The many people who deal with transmutations will be able to take advantage according to their ideas of this purely analytical document. Difficult to convince, but not being an enemy of new ideas, I have done this work at my industrial laboratory, and I will submit the impartial results of my observations. MICROCHEMICALANALYSIS, an artificial gold sample, presented by Mr. Tiffereau. The sample studied bears the number 3 and the mention prepared in Guadalajara, 1847, with silver filings alloyed with copper in proportion to the currency. Physical characteristics. The material in a small, sealed tube, at the appearance at first sight of a greenish-yellow powder quite fine. Under the objective of the microscope, we see that the powder is composed of metallic grains of a beautiful dull yellow and greenish-yellow in parts thin. The grains are formed by the juxtaposition of particles metallic, rounded like platinum foam, but as the material is yellow, it very much resembles the cut of a bee cake deprived of its honey, or even a fragment of sponge. There are no asperities and sharp angles, the material is hilly, we also do not find the faces shining with a metallic crystal. Unmelted metal breaks into a fine powder under the hammer, but after melting it becomes perfectly malleable. Chemical characteristics. Part of the gold dust weighing OG. Lu milligrams was easily dissolved in a mixture of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid. It's about bichloride prepared with the powder that the chemical reactions took place. Here is the composition of aqua regia, the best for dissolving this product. Pure and fuming nitric acid, 2 parts. Purified hydrochloric acid, 10 parts. We tried to dissolve the metal in a mixture nitric acid and hydriodic acid. It remained completely insoluble. Hydrobromic aqua regia was able to dissolve it with some difficulty. A mixture of hydrochloric acid and chromic acid produced a vigorous attack on the metal. By heating in the air a sliver of gold with a small potash fragment, the mass becomes yellowish. The gold gradually dissolves in the form of potassium aurate. A similar experiment made with soda did nothing given. A gold sample coated with concentrated hydrogen sulfide remained shiny even after 20 hours. A sample of gold treated with ammonia sulfide quickly turned black. There had training of a sulfide. A fragment of gold treated with a droplet of mercury dissolved very well. Dry gold testing torch. A metal splinter heated to a temperature high, melted into yellow corpuscles, malleable. When they solidify after melting, they become incandescent again. This reaction is absolutely similar to that produced with pure golds. This gold melted in crystal colors it in pale pink. Wet gold testing. Chemical reactions made on the aqueous solution of bichloride of the metal to be studied. Hydrosulfide, black precipitate, slowly soluble in alkaline sulfides. Ammonia sulfate, black precipitate, soluble in an excess of reagent. Soda ash, no precipitate, neither cold nor hot. Potash, no precipitation, neither hot nor cold. Ammonia, yellow precipitate, clear liquor. Potassium cyanophoride, emerald green color. Solution of tin chlorides, very weak reddish precipitate, the liquid is very brown. Oxalic acid, the liquor turns indigo blue, and a slight brown cloud probably coming from the reduction and the gold precipitation. In the analyzed sample, we do not find no traces of silica and copper, but there is the presence of a little silver. Study on natural gold physical properties. Native gold is never pure. It is always alloyed with silver in varying proportions. Also find silica. It always presents itself with a yellow color which is clean, and the metal is all the more yellow as it contains less silver. Its state is metallic. Its natural surfaces are not very shiny, but under the polishing of a wolf's tooth it takes on a lively, slightly greenish luster. Natural gold is harder than lead and pewter, but it is less so than silver, copper, and iron. It is very malleable, and samples can be reduced to extremely thin sheets by progressive beating. The density of natural gold is very variable, but on average it is 14.4. The density of gold by Mr. Tiffereau could not be established in an absolute way because the sample was too small. But by experiment special laboratory tests, it has been recognized that its density is much superior to natural tor. Native gold comes in filaments, branches, small crystals, having the shape of quadrangular pyramids or octahedrons, in blades, in flakes, in plates, in grains scattered in the rocks. In powder mixed with sand, finally it is often found in nuggets, that is to say in irregular pieces, more or less large. Chemical properties. To make the comparative chemical study on natural gold, I used not impure native gold, but purified gold, prepared in the laboratory. We dissolved the gold coin in aqua regia, made with 1 part of nitric acid at 20% of the hydrometer and 4 parts of very pure hydrochloric acid. We filter the liquor to separate it from the silver chloride which is formed and adds an excess of protochloride of antimony, dissolved in a mixture of water and hydrochloric acid. Gold rushes after a few hours, especially when the liquor is slightly heated, underforms small coherent blades that come together quickly. It is first washed with hydrochloric acid, then with distilled water, and melted in earthen crucible with a mixture of niter and borax. We obtained in this way a gold base at 1,001,000ths. That is chemically pure. This gold was dissolved in aqua regia, transformed into bichloride of gold, evaporated to dryness to hunt excess acid, and taken up in distilled water. On the aqueous solution, the reactions of gold very well known to chemists. I draw up the table below to facilitate the people who did not compare chemical reactions of artificial gold and pure gold natural. Hydrogen sulfide, black precipitate, soluble in alkaline sulfides. Ammonia sulfate, black precipitate, soluble in an excess of reagent. Soda ash, no precipitate when cold, yellowish precipitate when hot gold oxide. The liquor retains sodium aurate in dissolution. Potash, in a neutral solution, especially when hot, a reddish-yellow precipitate of gold oxide. Ammonia, fulminant golden-yellow precipitate. Potassium cyanophoride, emerald green color. Solution of tin chlorides, reddish-brown precipitate of cassius purple. A dilute solution is not precipitated but slowly turns brownish red. Oxalic acid, hot precipitation of metallic gold in the form of brown powder. At the time of precipitation, the liquor turns purple. A small quantity of filings coming from the prepared pure gold pellet was treated, as had been said above, by anhydriodic aqua regia. The solution of the metal took place. The same operation being carried out with hydrobromic acid, a complete dissolution was also obtained, and fast-processed gold powder. A mixture of hydrochloric acid and chromic acid vigorously attacked the metal. By heating in the air a fragment of potash with a little gold powder, the material has become beautiful soluble in water. It is potassium aurate. The same operation being made with protoxide of sodium or soda, we also obtained a mass a little less yellow, but soluble in water, there had training sodium aurate. A sample of powdered gold covered with a solution of hydrogen sulfide gas remained completely shiny. A sample of powdered gold covered with ammonium sulfate quickly turned black, because a thin layer has formed on the surface of the metal of a sulfide. The little powder of pure gold heat treated with mercury has completely disappeared. An amalgam of gold is formed. Dry torch testing of gold. A metal splinter heated to a temperature raised under the dart of the blowtorch melts into globules yellow malleable. By solidifying, they undergo the phenomenon of incandescence, and the surface of the globules looks wrinkled. Notes in conclusion. When comparing the physical properties of artificial gold to those of natural gold, there is a difference sensitive, though yet one can rarely find, it is true, native gold powders, having the same aspect than that of M. Tiffereau. As for the chemical properties, they are interesting to note. The main reactions of artificial gold are almost analogous to those of native gold. But some reactions, as can be seen, differ markedly from the usual reactions. I claim that it is precisely this abnormal result which gives a certain weight to Mr. Tiffereau's work. There is a fact which I cannot explain, but which exists, ultimately. This indicates that artificial gold has all the physical properties of native gold, but differs from it in a few chemical properties, not belonging specifically to another metal. I will recall here a passage from Mr. Lebrun de Verloy, a mining engineer, on increasing metal which he took great care of. Metal coming from the metallic growth appears to be at first in the nascent state, and then it does not exhibit all the reactions and properties of the adult metal. The metal can even disappear in whole or in part. House manages to fix it and make it pass to the adult state under the influence of certain chemical reactions. I do not have to discuss this theory here, but I note that the result of our work seems to support it. My mission is limited to giving a complete account of the laboratory work done under my direction of the gold sample given to me by Mr. Tiffereau, and it is to its exact study that I have attached myself. The specimen studied was not made before my eyes, having been prepared in Mexico in 1847. Gustave Vitas, chemist, 8, Rue Bayenne, Paris, France.